The Dead Don't Pray. Chapter 1. The fourth body was arranged like an offering. Detective Kate Brennan stood at the threshold of the storage unit and made herself look at all of it before she let herself feel any of it. That was the job. That was the only way the job worked. Salt in a wide, unbroken ring on the concrete. 7 candles, all burned to stubs, wax pooled like something that had wept and then stopped. A woman on her back at the center, arms crossed over her chest with a formality no living person arranged themselves into, as if someone had posed her for a photograph that would never be taken. Her name, according to the wallet in her bag near the door, was Renata Ibarra, 34, an insurance adjuster, according to the card behind her driver's license. A face that had once, presumably, done ordinary things, laughed at something on a screen, burned toast, argued about rent. Now it was locked in an expression Kate had seen 3 times before and still hadn't gotten used to. Terror, not fear. Fear was a flinch, a moment. This was a face that had gone somewhere past fear and stayed there long enough for the muscles to set. "Same as the others," said Officer Delgado from a safe distance by the door, the way rookies stood near bodies until they weren't rookies anymore. "Salt rings unbroken, no forced entry on the unit. No prints yet, but forensics just got here." Dr. Sophie Quinn came through the doorway a moment later, carrying a scene kit in one gloved hand like it weighed nothing, and something in Kate's chest did the small, irritating thing it had started doing 3 bodies ago, which she had decided not to examine too closely because there was a dead woman on the floor, and this was not the time. "You beat me to the candles," Sophie said, crouching at the ring's edge without stepping over it, headlamp already on though the unit had perfectly good work lights strung up. She liked her own light. She'd told Kate once it was about seeing color true, not filtered through whatever temperature bulb the county had bought in bulk. Kate had thought it was a strange kind of correct to care about. "I didn't touch them." "I know. I meant it as an observation, not an accusation." Sophie glanced up, the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile passing over her mouth before she went back to work. She had a face built for stillness, sharp, contained, the kind of composure that made people mistake her for cold until they watched her hands, which were never cold, which moved over the dead like she was apologizing to them in a language only they understood. "Same candle wax as the others. I'll get you a chemical match by tonight. But look at her hands." Kate looked. Renata Ibarra's hands, crossed at the wrist, were not clenched. No defensive wounds, no broken nails, no torn skin, nothing to suggest she'd fought whatever had put that look on her face. "She didn't fight," Kate said. "She didn't fight," Sophie agreed. "And there's no ligature bruising, no petechiae consistent with strangulation, no obvious wound. I won't know cause of death until I open her up. But I'll tell you what I told you about the third one because I already know what the preliminary tox screen's going to show. The same unidentified compound we found in the other 3, and I already know the imaging isn't going to explain why she's dead." She nodded at the dead woman without looking directly at her again, a small courtesy Kate had noticed she extended to all of them. Something happened to her that her body understood as the worst thing that has ever happened to anyone. And somewhere in the last 30 seconds of her life, apparently none of that mattered anymore. "That's not possible." "It's not statistically usual," Sophie said. "That's a different claim than not possible. I've got 3 data points already telling me the impossible one is wrong." Kate had worked homicide for 9 years, and she had a rule, which was that ritual staging was almost always a story someone was telling about themselves. A message, a compulsion, a cry dressed up as a threat. She had never had a rule for what to do when the message came from inside the body. "Walk me through it again," she said. "Slow, this time." Sophie sat back on her heels, peeling one glove part way to rub at her eyes with the back of a clean wrist. an old habit that Kate found herself watching more than the professional distance of this job allowed. Every victim shows classic terror markers: cortisol spike, adrenal signature, the facial rigor you're looking at right now. Their bodies were dying afraid. But the post-mortem cortical mapping, you've seen me run it, comes back showing a terminal gamma wave signature we typically associate with deep meditative states. Profound calm. In 2 of the 3, it edges into something closer to euphoria. She let that sit a second. It's like 2 different people died in the same body, 30 seconds apart. One of them was being murdered. The other one thought this was the best moment of her life. You have a theory. I have 3, and I don't like any of them enough to say them out loud yet. Sophie stood, stripping her gloves properly this time, and looked down at Renata Ibarra with an expression Kate had started to recognize. Not clinical distance, not quite. Something more like grief, held very carefully so it wouldn't spill on the evidence. Get her back to the morgue. I want her on the table before the signature degrades. They rode to the medical examiner's office in separate cars, which was how it always went, and Kate spent the drive doing what she always did after a scene, running the details forward and backward, looking for the seam. 4 victims in 6 weeks. No connection yet, beyond the staging, beyond the faces. Renata Ibarra didn't know Marcus Webb, the second victim, an accountant with 2 kids and a fantasy football league. Marcus Webb hadn't known Priya Anand, the first, a nurse who'd worked nights at County General for 11 years. None of them, as far as anyone had established, had known Daniel Ferris, victim 3, found in the same terrible piece 2 weeks ago in the back room of a shuttered laundromat. No connection, except the salt, the candles, the crossed hands, and the fact that all 4 of them had died, terrified, and left this world, apparently, at peace. Kate had a partner once who used to say that the dead don't lie, they just stop talking, and your job was to listen to everything they'd left behind instead. Danny had believed that with the specific, unkillable certainty of someone who had never once been wrong about it, until the night 4 years ago, when he had been wrong about exactly one thing, at exactly the wrong moment, and Kate had spent every case since trying to be as certain as he used to sound and never quite getting there. The dead don't lie. They also, as far as Kate had understood the universe up until about 6 weeks ago, didn't talk. She was about to find out how wrong she'd been about that too. Chapter 2. The morgue at 11 p.m. had a particular quality of quiet that Sophie had come to prefer to almost any other silence she knew. Not the anxious hush of a hospital corridor, not the performed quiet of a library. This was quiet with nothing left to prove. Everyone in this room had already had the worst thing that was ever going to happen to them, and there was a strange, unpopular comfort in that. Nothing left to fear here but the living. She had told Kate to go home. Kate had ignored her, the way she ignored most suggestions that didn't come with a legal citation, and had planted herself in the observation chair by the wall with a coffee gone cold an hour ago, scrolling through case files with the low blue light of her phone, the only thing moving in the room besides Sophie's hands. "You don't have to watch this part," Sophie said, not for the first time. "You don't have to let me," Kate said, not looking up. "But you keep leaving the door unlocked, so—" It was, Sophie privately thought, the closest thing to flirtation either of them had allowed themselves in 6 weeks of working a case that gave neither of them much room for anything but the case. She let it sit there without acknowledging it, the way she let most things about Kate Brennan sit unacknowledged, filed under "Not Now," a folder that was getting uncomfortably full. She made the Y incision with the same steady, unhurried hand she used for every autopsy, because the dead deserved a surgeon's care even when there was no possibility of harm left to prevent, and because sloppiness in this room was its own kind of disrespect. Renata Ibarra's organs told a story that was, on its face, unremarkable. Healthy heart, clean lungs, a liver that suggested a life of moderate choices. Nothing here explained why she was dead. The same unidentified compound found in the other 3 victims was present in her blood, but not at a concentration Sophie would normally expect to be fatal. No catastrophic organ damage, no trauma, no anatomical reason Renata Ibarra's heart should simply have stopped when it did. It was when Sophie reached for the cranial saw that the temperature in the room did something she would spend the next several days trying to explain to herself and failing. It wasn't cold exactly. It was more like the room had briefly forgotten to hold heat the way rooms were supposed to. A half-second of wrongness at the edge of her senses, gone before she could name it. She looked up instinctively, habit, not thought, expecting to find Kate had opened a door, let in a draft from the hall. Kate hadn't moved. She was watching Sophie with the phone forgotten in her lap. Her expression caught somewhere between concern and the specific alertness of a cop who had just felt something she couldn't file a report on. "You felt that," Sophie said. "I don't know what I felt." Sophie set the saw down, told herself, in the voice she used on residents who'd gone pale at their first floater, that unexplained sensory phenomena in a room full of refrigeration units and industrial ventilation had 100 boring explanations, and she should find one of them before she found a strange one. She was still telling herself that when Renata Ibarra's mouth moved, not a muscle spasm. Sophie had seen post-mortem muscle spasms, the body doing its last confused chemistry, nerves firing into a void. She knew what those looked like, the small twitch and release, meaningless as a held breath let go. This was not that. This was the deliberate, shaping motion of a mouth forming words, air moving through a throat that had no business moving air, a larynx that should have been as inert as the steel table beneath it. Don't let it take me. No sound. Or not sound the way sound worked, not vibrating through the room to strike Sophie's eardrums the ordinary way. It arrived somewhere closer in than that, behind her sternum, under her collarbone, a message that skipped the ears entirely and announced itself directly to whatever in her was doing the listening. She did not scream. She had trained for 12 years to be a person who did not scream in this room, and some reflex older than her training kept her upright and still, gloved hands frozen an inch above the body while every hair on her arms rose at once. "Sophie." Kate was on her feet. "Sophie, what?" "You didn't hear that." It wasn't a question. Sophie could see it in Kate's face. Alarm, urgency, the particular fear of watching someone else fall apart. But not recognition. Not the look of someone who had heard the same 5 words Sophie had just heard arrive from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Hear what?" "Sophie, talk to me." Sophie looked down at Renata Ibarra's face. Slack again. Ordinary dead again. Whatever ordinary dead meant for a woman found inside a salt ring, with her hands crossed like a saint's. The terror was still there, fixed in the muscle, but something else had gone out of the room, some charge, some presence, as completely as it had arrived. "I need you to trust me for about 30 seconds, Sophie said, "and not ask me anything until I've had a chance to think." Kate, to her enormous credit, and Sophie would think about this later, would turn it over more than she probably should have, did not ask. Chapter 3. They ended up at an all-night diner 2 blocks from the morgue because neither of them could stand the idea of the morgue's break room, with its vending machine hum and its proximity to Renata Ibarra's newly, disturbingly occupied silence. Sophie ordered coffee she didn't drink. Kate ordered a slice of pie she didn't eat. The waitress, a tired woman in her 50s who had clearly seen every kind of 2 a.m. conversation this booth had to offer, left them alone with the efficient mercy of someone who understood when not to ask. "Say it again," Kate said. Slower. So Sophie said it again, slower, and hated how it sounded out loud. a forensic pathologist, board-certified, 12 years in the field, describing a message from a dead woman's mouth that hadn't used sound to get where it was going. She watched Kate's face for the moment it would tip over into humoring her, the careful, professional gentleness people used right before they suggested you take some time off. It didn't come. "You're not looking at me like I'm losing it," Sophie said, surprised into saying it plainly. "I'm not sure you are." Kate turned her coffee mug a slow quarter turn on the formica, a habit Sophie had clocked weeks ago and privately found unreasonably endearing, the small, compulsive precision of it. 4 bodies, all of them terrified when they died. All of them, your word, at peace. Underneath that, in some way, medicine can't explain. And now one of them talks to you. That's not 4 separate, impossible things, Sophie. That might be one impossible thing, wearing 4 faces. You believe me? I believe you felt the room change temperature, and I believe you heard something you can't explain, because I felt the first part myself, and I've never once, in 9 years, watched you make something up to get attention. You're the least attention-seeking person I've ever worked a scene with. You'd rather be right and unnoticed than wrong and interesting. Kate said it like a compliment, and something in Sophie loosened slightly at hearing it delivered that way, plain and certain, no hedge in it at all. So no, I don't think you're losing it. I think something happened in that room that neither of us has a word for yet, and I would very much like to find the word before whoever's doing this finds a 5th person to leave in a salt circle. Sophie wrapped both hands around the coffee she wasn't going to drink, grateful for the warmth of the mug, uncomfortably aware of how much she wanted, in that moment, for Kate to reach across the table and put a hand over hers. She didn't examine the wanting too closely. There would be time for that later, she told herself, distantly aware that she was lying, the way you lie to yourself about anything you intend to keep circling back to. "There's a pattern I haven't told you," she said instead. "I wasn't sure it meant anything until tonight." Kate went very still. "Tell me." All 4 of the terminal cortical scans, the peace, the near euphoria, they don't just resemble a meditative state generally. They resemble a very specific signature, the kind we see in patients during a documented near-death experience, the kind you get from people who've been resuscitated after clinical death and come back describing. Sophie made herself say it, because saying it was the job, and the job was the only stable thing she had left to stand on right now. Describing light, peace, something waiting for them, welcoming them in. "You're saying these 4 people had near-death experiences." "I'm saying their brains behaved as if they did, except none of them came back to describe it." Sophie made herself meet Kate's eyes. Except, apparently, one of them just tried to. Chapter 4. The next 2 weeks moved the way cases always moved in the middle. Not the adrenaline of the scene, not yet the vertigo of the break, but the long, attritional grind of canvassing and cross-referencing, financial records and phone dumps, the unglamorous archaeology that made up 90% of actual detective work. Kate spent it building a whiteboard that looked, by the second week, like the inside of a very organized, very tired brain. 4 photographs, 4 timelines, a widening web of red string connecting nothing to nothing. She spent a surprising amount of it, too, finding reasons to be at the medical examiner's office that didn't strictly require her presence. "You could email me the talk's results," Sophie said one afternoon, not looking up from her microscope, though the corner of her mouth suggested she wasn't actually objecting. "I could." Kate leaned against the doorframe of Sophie's office, which had become, over the weeks, more comfortable to her than her own desk. Books on forensic entomology stacked with a geologist's precision. A single photograph, half turned away from visitors, of a teenage Sophie standing beside an older woman with the same sharp eyes, both of them squinting into sun on some lake dock. A dead orchid Sophie kept meaning to either revive or throw out and had evidently been unable to do either. "I like the drive. You live 4 minutes from here." It's a nice 4 minutes. Sophie did look up then, and something passed between them that had been passing between them in careful, unacknowledged installments since roughly the second body. A warmth that neither of them had named, because naming it felt like it would require doing something about it. And there was a killer active in the city and 4 families waiting for answers neither of them yet had. Same compound? Kate asked, nodding at the file open on Sophie's desk. Same compound, Sophie said. 4 for 4. Whatever it is, it clears quickly, and it shouldn't be killing people at the concentrations we're finding, which is becoming less reassuring every time I say it. How's the whiteboard? Sophie asked, which was as close as either of them came, most days, to asking, how are you really? Red string and nothing to hang it on. Kate came in and sat, uninvited, in the chair across from Sophie's desk, the one that had unofficially become hers. No overlapping social circles, no shared employer, doctor, gym, church, different neighborhoods, different income brackets, different everything except the exact same violent death and the exact same impossible peace underneath it. She pulled a thick folder out of her bag and dropped it on the desk. Financial records. 4 months back on all of them. I've been through it twice, and I can't find the seam. Thought you might see something I didn't. Kate spread the 4 sets of records out across the desk. Sophie looked at them for less than a minute before her finger stopped. There. 4 small, recurring transactions Kate wouldn't have flagged in 100 years of looking because they were so small, so unremarkable. A $15 monthly donation, same amount, 4 different bank statements, going out around the same date each month to an account registered to something called the Elias Cole Foundation for Grief and Renewal. A grief charity, Kate said. A grief charity that every single one of our victims was quietly giving money to. Sophie tapped each statement in turn. Renata Ibarra's mother died 8 months ago. Marcus Webb's twin brother, overdose, a year and a half back. Priya Anand lost a husband to cancer 3 years ago. And Daniel Ferris. She paused, and Kate could see the particular unease that came from finding a pattern you'd rather not have found. Was seeing a grief counselor for what his file describes as suicidal ideation, following a divorce. Kate sat with that for a long moment. Grief support group, all 4 victims. That's not thin, Sophie. That's the whole case. It's a thread, Sophie said. I don't know what it's attached to yet. Then let's go find out. Chapter 5. The Sanctuary. The public-facing name of the Elias Cole Foundation, according to a website with soft gray branding and stock photography of hands cupped around candlelight, met Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the basement of a converted church on the east side of the city, the kind of neighborhood in the slow middle of gentrification, half-boutique coffee shop and half-boarded storefront. Kate sat across the street in an unmarked car with Sophie in the passenger seat, watching a trickle of people arrive in the blue hour before dark, mostly alone, a few in twos, all of them moving with the particular careful posture of people carrying something heavy they'd gotten used to the weight of. We could just go in, Sophie said. It's a support group. It's not exactly guarded. We could, Kate agreed, and tip off whoever's running this that a detective and a medical examiner have connected 4 murder victims to their donor list. I'd rather watch first. They watched a man in his 60s with a cane go down the steps. A young woman clutching a coffee she wasn't drinking, the same nervous prop Sophie had ordered 2 weeks ago in the diner, Kate noted, and didn't say. A tall figure in a long dark coat who arrived last, unhurried, moving with the unbothered ease of someone who had never once in his life worried about being late for anything, and let himself in through a side door instead of the front, a detail Kate filed without comment. That's not a support group member, Kate said. No, Sophie agreed. That's staff. They sat with the engine off long enough that the windows began to fog faintly with their breath, and Kate found herself intensely, uselessly aware of how close Sophie was in the small space of the car. 6 inches, less. The particular charged quiet of two people not talking about the thing they were both thinking about. She thought about Danny for a second, unbidden, the way she always did in cars on stakeouts. Some old grief surfacing sideways the way grief did. And then she thought, with a clarity that startled her, that this, whatever was building between her and the woman beside her, felt like the first thing in 4 years that hadn't arrived wearing his shadow. "Can I ask you something that isn't about the case?" Sophie said, into the quiet, and Kate felt her whole chest go still and attentive, the way it did before a verdict. "Yeah." "Why homicide?" Sophie was looking out the windshield, not at her, which Kate understood as its own kind of courtesy. Easier to ask hard things without eye contact demanding an immediate performance of composure in return. You could have done 100 things with the mind you have. Why the worst days of strangers' lives? Kate turned the question over before answering it, which was rare for her. Usually she had a clean, professional answer rehearsed for exactly this question, the one she gave at recruiting panels and family barbecues. She found she didn't want to give Sophie that one. "I had a partner," she said instead. "Danny Reyes. 4 years ago, we caught a domestic call that went bad, worse than bad. He went through a door I told him to wait on because he had this thing he used to say, that the dead don't lie, they just stop talking, and your job is to listen to what they left behind, and he never once let that go. Not for a body, not for a call, not for anything. He went through the door because somebody inside needed listening to right that second, and he never came back out." She kept her eyes on the church steps, on the last few stragglers filing in. "I do this because somebody has to be the person who goes and listens. I just try to survive doing it, which I don't think he ever really planned on." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, she reached over and put her hand over Kate's on the gear shift, not asking anything, not performing comfort, just present, warm, entirely still. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. Kate turned her hand over under Sophie's, laced their fingers without deciding to, a small, unplanned intimacy that neither of them commented on and neither of them pulled away from, and they sat like that in the darkening car, watching a church basement fill with the grieving until it was fully night. Chapter 6. Sophie told her about the accident 3 nights later in Sophie's apartment, over Thai food gone cold in its containers because neither of them had remembered to eat while talking. "I was 17, she said. Icy road, a truck that didn't stop in time. I flatlined for 90 seconds in the ambulance. The paramedics still talk about it if you ever meet them, which you won't, because one of them retired to Florida, and the other one I make a point of avoiding at conferences." She said it lightly, the practiced lightness of a story worn smooth from years of handling. 90 seconds isn't long, but it's long enough. Long enough for what? I don't actually know how to describe it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm telling you I saw a light and my dead grandmother waved, Sophie said. And there was an old, careful flinch in it, the particular wariness of someone who had told this story before and watched it cost her credibility in rooms where credibility was her entire currency. "I've never told anyone at work. I built a whole career on being the person in the room who trusts data over feeling, and I built it partly because of those 90 seconds, because I needed to know I could still be someone science took seriously, even though something happened to me that science can't fully hold." "What happened?" Sophie was quiet for a while, turning her chopsticks over, and Kate didn't fill the silence because she'd learned across 2 months and 4 bodies that Sophie's silences were where the truest things lived, if you let them arrive on their own schedule. "I felt a door," Sophie said finally. "That's the closest word I have. Not a light? That's what people say because it's the word that's available, but that's not what it was. It was more like, You know how a room feels different the second before someone opens the door into it from outside? That pressure change, that sense of a threshold about to be crossed? I felt that. For 90 seconds, I was standing at a door that was, very gently, deciding whether to open. She looked up, and then it decided not to, and I was 17 and cold, and someone was shouting my name and doing compressions on my chest, and I never told anyone the door part, because the door part is the part that gets you a psych referral instead of a residency. You're telling me now. I'm telling you now, Sophie agreed, because 2 weeks ago a dead woman used my body as a doorway to say 5 words to me, and I think... She exhaled, a long breath that seemed to cost her something to release. I think whatever door I stood at when I was 17 never fully closed behind me. I think that's why I'm the one who heard her, and not you, and not the tech running the scanner, and not anyone else who's ever stood in that room. I think I've been standing a little too close to that threshold for 18 years, and something out there has finally noticed. Kate reached across the small space of the coffee table and took Sophie's hand, the second time in 3 days that Sophie's hand had ended up in hers. And something about the second time felt less accidental than the first, more like a decision quietly being made by both of them at once. Then we go stand at the door together, Kate said. Whatever it is, you're not doing this alone. Sophie looked at their joined hands for a long moment and then up, and the look on her face was something Kate hadn't seen there before. Not the careful composure of the morgue, not the guarded warmth of the last few weeks, but something unguarded and a little frightened and entirely open. The look of someone deciding to want something out loud after a long time spent not letting herself. I haven't wanted anyone to know that story in a very long time, Sophie said quietly. I don't know what to do with wanting you to. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, Kate said, and meant it, though every part of her wanted to close the 6 inches of coffee table between them and see what Sophie's mouth felt like saying her name instead of case numbers. Tonight we just eat the cold noodles and figure out who Elias Cole is. Sophie laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the first one Kate had heard from her in the exhausting, terrifying weeks since Priya Anand's body had turned up in the back of an ambulance bay, with her hands crossed over her chest like a woman already praying for herself. Elias Cole, Sophie said, runs a website with unbearable stock photography and a donor list of dead people. Where do you want to start? With the man in the long dark coat, Kate said, who let himself in the side door like he owned the place. I want to know who that is. Chapter 7. The man in the long dark coat found them first. He was sitting in Sophie's usual booth at the diner 2 blocks from the morgue when she came in alone at 11:30, having sent Kate home for once. An actual, non-negotiable order, delivered after Kate had gone 29 hours without sleep, chasing corporate filings on the Elias Cole Foundation, and started making the kind of small mistakes that got detectives hurt. Sophie had told her to sleep. She had apparently forgotten to take her own advice, and here she was at the diner at midnight instead of in bed, and here was a stranger in her booth, and she was too tired to be as alarmed as she probably should have been. You're in my seat, she said. I know. He didn't look up from the coffee he was turning between long fingers, black, no milk, untouched. He was older than he'd looked from across the street outside the church. Or younger, she couldn't decide, his face doing an unsettling thing where it seemed to resettle slightly every time she looked away and back. Never quite the same arrangement of features twice, though always recognizably itself. I thought it would be a more efficient way to get your attention than following you home, which I did consider, and which felt like the kind of thing that would get me shot, given your girlfriend's profession. She's not? Sophie started, out of pure reflex, and then abandoned the correction, because it wasn't the important part of the sentence, and because some traitorous part of her didn't actually want to argue the point too hard. Who are you? You can call me Corvin." He gestured at the seat across from him, an invitation with the exact right amount of harmlessness in it, calibrated, she thought uneasily, like a man who had learned exactly how much space to take up to seem safe. "Sit down, Dr. Quinn. I promise this will be more useful than frightening, though I understand those two things aren't always separable." She sat. She would think, later, that she should have called Kate first, should have done 100 things differently, but there was something about him, a stillness, a weight to his attention, that made refusal feel less like caution and more like missing the only chance she'd get. "You're not staff at the sanctuary," she said. "You're not a grief counselor. No. You're not entirely human, either," she said, surprising herself with how certain she was of it the moment she said it out loud. Some instinct from that 90-second door 18 years ago, recognizing something in him that had nothing to do with training or evidence. Corvin smiled, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite an eye at all. An old, banked heat, gone as fast as it arrived, there and then politely tucked away again like a weapon set down on a table between them. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. And you're not entirely a stranger to what I am, which is why I'm here instead of leaving this to sort itself out on schedule, the way it's supposed to." "What are you?" "The word you're groping for is demon, and I'd rather you not flinch when you hear it, because we have limited time and flinching wastes it." He said it the way a man might say accountant or dentist, a profession with a bad reputation it was tired of defending. "I'm not here to hurt you, Dr. Quinn. I'm here because someone is breaking rules that even people like me depend on, and it's making an unholy mess, and 4 dead grieving people is only the beginning of what it's going to cost if nobody stops it." Sophie sat very still, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't ordered, and made herself breathe the way she made herself breathe over every table she'd ever stood at in the morgue. Steady, professional, present. "Explain." "There's an order to this," Corvin said. "There has been since before your species figured out fire. A soul is collected at the moment of death, not before, not after, exactly at the threshold, and never, under any circumstance, early. That's not a moral rule. It's closer to a load-bearing wall. Take a soul before its death, and you don't just steal a life. You put a crack in the wall the rest of us are all still standing under." He turned the coffee cup another quarter turn. An old habit, she thought, unable to place why it struck her as familiar, and then remembering, with a small jolt, Kate's hand on a gear shift doing the same thing 3 nights ago. Someone is taking souls early, at the exact moment of maximum terror and maximum surrender, the instant a person is most willing to let go of everything, most open to being told there's peace waiting on the other side of the pain. They're being harvested right at that threshold, offered a doorway out, and taken through it before their death was ever due. "Renata Ibarra," Sophie said slowly. "Marcus Webb, Priya Anand, Daniel Ferris. 4 that I know of. There are more coming, and soon, if this isn't stopped." Corvin's face, for the first time, showed something that looked almost like the thing humans called worry, an expression that sat strangely on features that kept refusing to hold still. And because someone is taking souls that were never due, some of us have started putting them back, temporarily. It's not sanctioned, exactly, but it's not forbidden either, which in my line of work amounts to the same permission. A soul returned to its body, even briefly, even after death, can sometimes speak. If there's a door nearby, it can speak through. Don't confuse that with restoring a life. A closed door can sometimes be spoken through. It cannot simply be reopened. "Me," Sophie said. "You," Corvin agreed. "You've been standing at your own threshold for a long time, Dr. Quinn. It's why the dead find you so easy to talk to. And it's why I'm telling you all this instead of one of the several hundred other medical examiners currently on shift in this city." Who's doing it? Taking them? Corvin's expression closed, very slightly, the shutters coming down on something he had clearly already decided not to say fully, not yet. Someone who believes she's saving them, he said, which was somehow worse than any villain Sophie had braced herself for. Someone who thinks the alternative to what she's doing is so much worse that theft looks like mercy from where she's standing. I'd tell you her name, but you're not ready to hear it, and I'd rather you believe me about the rest first. He stood, dropping cash on the table for coffee he hadn't drunk, a courtesy that struck her as strange and oddly touching in a being who had just described himself as a demon. Tell your detective everything I've told you. She's going to need to hear it from you, not from me. She trusts you, and she has excellent reasons not to trust anything that looks like me. Why are you helping us? What's in it for you? Corvin paused at the edge of the booth, and for a moment the strange, unsettled quality of his face resolved into something almost tired, almost old, in a way that made her, for just a second, feel something disconcertingly close to sympathy. Balance, he said. The wall holds, or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, it isn't only your friends up above who lose something when it falls. Some of us would very much like to keep our half of the ceiling intact, Dr. Quinn. Ask your detective how she'd feel if the entire architecture-keeping order between the living and the dead came down, because one angel decided she knew better than the structure holding up both our houses. He left before she could ask anything else, and it wasn't until she was halfway through the parking lot, keys shaking slightly in her hand, that she registered the word he'd used, dropped almost casually at the very end. The word she'd need 3 more hours and one very long phone call to Kate to fully believe. Angel. Chapter 8. Kate didn't sleep after the call. She drove to Sophie's apartment instead, arriving at 1:30 in the morning in sweatpants and a department hoodie, having abandoned every rule she had about professional distance somewhere around the phrase, "He says he's a demon and he says an angel is doing this," and found Sophie sitting on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, arms wrapped around her knees, looking younger and more frightened than Kate had ever seen her look over a body. "Hey." Kate lowered herself down beside her without asking, close enough that their shoulders touched, offering warmth without demanding a response to it. "I'm here. Tell me again, slower, and then we're going to figure out what to do with it." Sophie told her again, slower. Corvin, the diner, the wall and the threshold, the theft dressed up as mercy. And Kate listened with the specific, total attention she gave to every witness statement she'd ever taken, filing details, watching for the places Sophie's voice wavered, cataloging what mattered. "An angel," Kate said when Sophie finished, "taking souls early, because she thinks she's saving them from something worse." That's what he said. "And a demon is putting them back because it's bad for business." He said balance. I don't think it's quite that cynical, but I also don't think it's not a little bit that cynical. Sophie let her head drop sideways onto Kate's shoulder, exhaustion finally outpacing fear, and Kate felt something in her chest settle at the weight of it, the trust implied in someone letting their guard down enough to simply lean. I believed him. I don't know why. 2 months ago, I would have called security on anyone who told me that story. Tonight I sat across from him and I believed every word. "I believe you," Kate said, which means I believe him, secondhand, which is not a sentence I ever expected to say in this job. She pressed a kiss, careful and light and entirely unplanned, to the top of Sophie's head, the first time either of them had crossed that particular line, and felt Sophie go still against her. Not pulling away, just registering it, the way you register a threshold underfoot. "We're going to find whoever's doing this. Angel, demon, doesn't matter what she is. If she's out here terrorizing grieving people and calling it mercy, she's going to meet me the same way every other predator in this city meets me." Sophie lifted her head, and in the low kitchen light, her face was open in a way Kate hadn't let herself hope for yet, want plain and unguarded and a little disbelieving of its own existence. You're not afraid of this, genuinely not afraid. I watched you find out demons are real over the phone, and you drove straight here in your pajamas to make a plan. I've been afraid of things I couldn't fight my whole career, Kate said. Grief. Time. The 4 years since I lost Danny and couldn't fix it no matter how many bad guys I put away. An angel who murders people and thinks it's kindness. That, at least, I can point a case file at. That's almost a relief compared to the rest of it. Sophie's hand came up to Kate's jaw, slow enough that Kate could have stopped it, could have said something to keep the weeks of careful distance intact one more night, and didn't, because she was tired of pretending she wanted to. I want to kiss you, Sophie said plainly, the same directness she brought to a table full of the dead. And I want you to know that if I do, it's not because I'm frightened and looking for something to hold on to. I've wanted to for weeks. I just didn't think it was fair to start something with a killer still loose and my whole understanding of the universe falling apart. Sophie. Kate's voice came out rougher than she meant it to. I have wanted you since the second body. I have been holding a professional line so hard my hands hurt from it. Kiss me because you want to. The universe can keep falling apart. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie kissed her, careful at first, a question, and then not careful at all, the accumulated weight of weeks of unacknowledged wanting arriving all at once, Kate's hand coming up to cradle the back of Sophie's neck, Sophie's fingers curling into the front of her hoodie like she meant to keep her there. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m, with an angel and a killer still out there in the dark, Sophie laughed, soft and disbelieving. Of all the moments, she said. There was never going to be a good one, Kate said. I'll take this one. Chapter 9. They didn't let themselves have more than that night, a handful of stolen hours, tangled together on Sophie's couch, because neither of them trusted themselves to sleep separately, and both of them needed, badly, some proof that the last few weeks hadn't been only horror, before the case pulled them back under. Elias Cole, it turned out, was not hard to find. He had simply never needed hiding. A defrocked Episcopal priest turned grief counselor whose public record was spotless enough to be its own kind of red flag. No complaints, no lawsuits, a foundation with clean books and a genuinely devoted client base who described him, in the handful of interviews Kate conducted under the pretense of a wellness check, as the man who had saved their lives. He listens, said the young woman with the untouched coffee, the one Sophie had spotted outside the church weeks ago. Her name was Marisol, and she had lost a sister to suicide 2 years back and had come frighteningly close to following her 4 months ago, before the sanctuary found her. He doesn't tell you it gets better, because it doesn't. Not really. Not the way people mean when they say that. He tells you the door's always there if you need it, and just knowing that helps me get through the days I don't want the door. What door? Kate asked, careful, casual, a cop's practiced neutrality masking the sudden cold drop in her stomach. It's a metaphor, Marisol said, and something in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely certain of that herself. Some unexamined unease she'd folded neatly away in exchange for feeling saved. He says grief opens a door in you that never fully shuts, and instead of being afraid of it, you can learn to trust what's on the other side. That when you're ready, really ready, not just tired, the door opens both ways. Kate thanked her, gave her a card, told her to call if anything about Cole or the sanctuary ever felt wrong, and drove straight to the morgue with her hands tight on the wheel the whole way, already dialing Sophie before she'd left the parking lot. He's not killing them, Kate said, the second Sophie picked up. He's not even lying to them, not really. He's finding people standing at the exact edge Corvin described, grief-worn, exhausted, right at the threshold, and he's convincing them the door is safe to open. And then something on the other side of it opens it for them, early, whether they were actually ready or not. A recruiter, Sophie said slowly. Not a killer, he's just pointing at the door. And somebody's been walking through it and taking whoever's standing there, Kate said. We need to know who's next, and we need to know who's opening that door from the other side. There was a silence on the line. The particular weighted silence Kate had learned meant Sophie was working through something she didn't want to say yet, and then, I think I might already know part of that answer. I had a thought at 2 a.m. that I didn't want to say out loud until I'd checked it, and I checked it 3 times, and I still don't like it. Tell me anyway. The gamma wave signature, Sophie said. The one I keep telling you looks like a documented near-death experience. I ran it against a specific archived case this morning, a coma patient from 11 years ago at a hospital I used to work at, who came back from clinical death describing an entity of profound, overwhelming light who told her, and I'm quoting the patient's own account from the file, that she was not supposed to be in so much pain, and that mercy sometimes meant leaving early. Sophie's voice had gone careful, precise, the tone she used when she was trying very hard not to let fear show through the facts. The patient's cortical signature at the moment of that encounter is a 94% match to all 4 of our victims. And there's one more thing. The compound in our 4 victims wasn't present in the archived case, which means it isn't causing the cortical signature. Whatever that signature is, it isn't pharmacological. You're saying whoever's behind this has done this before. I'm saying whoever's behind this has been doing this for at least 11 years, Sophie said, and I think she's getting less careful or less patient or both. Kate, I think it's speeding up. Chapter 10. Sophie went back to the sanctuary alone on a Thursday evening, breaking the one rule Kate had made her promise to keep after the diner conversation about Corvin. You don't go near that building without me, not once, not ever, because the 5th candidate, a 19-year-old named Ben Torres, 3 months out from his mother's overdose, exactly the kind of standing at the threshold grief Cole seemed to seek out, had missed his last 2 shifts at the auto shop where he worked, and someone needed eyes inside the building before another salt ring turned up somewhere in the city with a body inside it. It wasn't the first time she'd slipped inside. Since the stakeout in Kate's car, she'd let herself into the basement twice more, alone, unannounced, sitting quietly at the back of the room under the thin cover of a stranger's grief, never sharing, never engaging beyond what politeness required, just watching Cole move through the room and cataloging what she could. She told herself it counted as fieldwork. She told herself it was reconnaissance. She told herself she'd only watch from the pews at the back of the basement meeting, blend into a support group the way she'd blended into 100 crime scenes, gather what she could, and leave before anyone noticed a stranger in the room. She had not told Kate she was going, because Kate would have insisted on coming, and a homicide detective's face was rather more memorable to a man who might already be watching for exactly that. It was, in retrospect, a bad plan built on a good enough impulse, and Sophie would spend a long time afterward being grateful it hadn't cost her more than it did. The meeting was ordinary in a way that made the wrongness underneath it worse. Folding chairs, a tray of cheap cookies, a dozen people speaking with the raw, unguarded honesty of the genuinely bereaved, Elias Cole moving among them with a warmth that was, disconcertingly, entirely real. He was not a con man performing sincerity. He believed every word he said. That was, Sophie thought, watching him crouch beside an elderly widower and take both his hands, somehow so much worse than if he hadn't. Ben Torres wasn't there. Sophie noted his absence, noted the particular way Cole's eyes moved to the empty chair where he usually sat, noted the flicker of something. Anticipation, not concern, crossing his face before he smoothed it away, and knew, with the certainty of a diagnosis, that she'd found her 5th victim's location before she'd found the victim himself. She should have left then. She stayed one meeting too long, lingering by the coffee urn afterward, trying to overhear where Cole might be headed next, and that was when Elias Cole himself, a face she knew now from the Foundation's website and from 2 prior meetings, watched from the back row, mild and gray-haired and unhurried, found her by the exit instead, blocking it with the unbothered confidence of a man who had never once needed to hurry for anything. "You're not one of ours," he said pleasantly, and up close his eyes were kind in a way that made the hair on Sophie's arms rise, kindness with something ancient and patient standing just behind it, wearing his face like a well-fitted coat. "This isn't your first meeting. You never share. You watch the door more than you watch the room." He tilted his head, and for just a moment, something moved behind his expression that wasn't Cole at all, something that regarded Sophie with a cold, assessing interest, recognition dawning slow and terrible. "Oh," he said, in a voice that had gone very soft. "You're her, the one the dead talk to." Sophie's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Cole's hand closed around her wrist, not violently, almost gently, the touch of a man guiding a lost congregant back toward the light. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite madness either, the specific, glassy certainty of a man who has spent 11 years believing he serves something holy. "She's going to want to meet you. You're a door too, aren't you? Just a smaller one than the one I open. That's rare. That's very rare. Come with me, and I promise you'll understand everything, and none of it will hurt." "Let go of me." Sophie kept her voice level, professional, the voice she used on hostile family members at a scene, and reached for the pepper spray in her coat pocket with her free hand, already calculating the distance to the door, the exits, the 2 flights of stairs between her and the street. She didn't get the chance to use it. The overhead lights flickered, not the mundane flicker of old wiring, but something with intention behind it, a pulse that made Sophie's vision swim. And Cole's grip tightened hard enough to bruise, his whole body gone suddenly, unnaturally still, the way a man goes still when he's listening to a voice no one else in the room can hear. The door behind them slammed open before Sophie had time to be as frightened as the moment deserved. "Get away from her." Kate's voice, flat and lethal in a way Sophie had never heard it before, cop voice stripped down to something older and more animal, gun already drawn and level before the door had finished swinging. "Now." Cole's grip loosened, the strange stillness draining out of him, his shoulders dropping back into ordinary human kindness, and he released Sophie's wrist with a small, almost apologetic bow of his head, as though he'd merely been holding a door for her and she'd misunderstood the courtesy. "Detective Brennan," he said warmly. "I wondered when you'd come. You should tell your girlfriend to be more careful about which meetings she attends alone. Grief is a dangerous thing to wander into unaccompanied." He looked back at Sophie once more, something almost tender in it, monstrous for how genuine it was. "We'll speak again. There isn't any hurry. There's never any hurry from where I'm standing." He walked past both of them and out into the night, and Kate let him go, gun still trained on his retreating back. Sophie could make the complaint. The bruises already forming around her wrist would support it. But an arrest for assault would buy them hours at best, and if Ben Torres was already somewhere inside Cole's machinery, hours were the one thing they could not afford to spend processing the wrong charge. "How did you know I was here?" Sophie managed, once the door had shut and Kate had holstered the gun and pulled her in, both arms, tight enough to feel like an anchor. Kate didn't answer right away. She held on a beat longer than the question needed, like she was still deciding how much of it to admit to out loud, and when she finally spoke, it came out steadier than Sophie expected, the words of someone who'd already had time to argue herself into this. "You've had a particular kind of quiet about you the last few days," Kate said into her hair, voice rough with adrenaline that hadn't finished burning off. "I know that quiet. It's the one you get right before you do something you've already decided not to ask permission for, Because you're afraid I'll talk you out of it, or worse, that I'll come with you and get us both caught before you've learned anything. I clocked it Tuesday. I almost said something then. She exhaled, long and unsteady. I thought about stopping you outright, taking your keys, making it a fight, and I probably could have won that fight. I decided that wasn't actually my call to make. You've never once been wrong about which thread was worth pulling, and I wasn't going to be the reason you didn't pull this one. So instead of stopping you, I followed you. I've been parked across the street for the better part of an hour, telling myself I'd only come in if I had to. You had to, Sophie said, still shaking. I had to, Kate agreed. The second those lights did whatever they just did, I was already through the door. I'm not sorry I gave you the room to do this your way, right up until the exact second I wasn't willing to anymore. But I need you to understand that was the last time. Not because I don't trust your judgment. I trust it more than almost anything I've got. Because I'm not spending one more night sitting in a car doing math about how long I can stand to wait before I stop being careful and start being useful. Next time, I'm in the room with you from the beginning. Don't ever do that alone again. I found Ben Torres, Sophie said, muffled against Kate's shoulder, still shaking. He wasn't there. I think that means we're already too late, or we're about to be. Then we go now, Kate said. Both of us, together or not at all. Chapter 11. They found Ben Torres's apartment through his employer's emergency contact form, a girlfriend named Priya, not the same Priya, a coincidence Kate noted and set aside, who let them in with the raw, frightened cooperation of someone who had already known, on some unspoken level, that something was badly wrong. The apartment was empty, a half-drunk glass of water on the counter, a phone left charging on the nightstand, 3 days of unanswered messages stacked up in it. No sign of struggle, no sign of anything, which by now Kate had learned to recognize as its own kind of terrible sign. They found him 4 hours later, following a trail Sophie built out of the same small, thin threads that had cracked the case open in the first place. Donation records, a storage facility rented under a name that traced, after 2 more hours of digging, back to a shell corporation registered to the Elias Cole Foundation. A different unit this time, on the far side of the city, salt already laid in an unbroken ring on the concrete floor when they arrived, 7 candles unlit and waiting, Ben Torres unconscious but breathing in the center of it, an IV line taped badly into the crook of one arm, the bag beside him almost empty. The 7 candles were still unlit. Whatever Cole had intended to do next, they had arrived before he could begin it. There was no ritual to interrupt, no killer standing over him with a weapon, just a boy who should have been at work 3 days ago, breathing shallow and slow on cold concrete, and the particular silence of a trap that hadn't been sprung yet. They got him to a hospital. He would live. Toxicology showed the same unidentified compound found in the 4 dead victims, but at a lower concentration. Dehydrated, disoriented, and weak, Ben could account for almost none of the missing 3 days beyond a vague, troubling sense of having been somewhere very peaceful and then somewhere very cold. A description that made the back of Sophie's neck prickle with recognition she didn't share with the attending physician. We found him early enough, Sophie said once they were alone in the corridor outside his room, like she needed to hear herself say it out loud before she'd believe it. Kate turned to her. Before the drug killed him? That's the problem. Sophie frowned. I don't think the drug killed the others, not by itself. It should have felt like a victory. It felt instead like the eye of something much larger passing directly overhead, close enough that both of them understood, without needing to say it aloud, that the danger hadn't ended. It had only paused. They went back to Sophie's apartment near dawn, wrung out in the specific way that came after adrenaline finally released its grip, and lay tangled together on top of the covers without undressing, too exhausted for anything but the comfort of proximity. Kate's arm heavy and warm across Sophie's waist, Sophie's head tucked beneath Kate's chin. "He said I was a door," Sophie murmured into the quiet, half asleep, the words slipping out before she'd fully decided to say them. "Cole. He said I was a smaller door than the one he opens." "What does that mean, Kate? What am I standing in the middle of?" Kate's arm tightened around her, an instinctive, protective pressure. "I don't know, but whatever it means, you're not standing in it alone. I already told you that once tonight. I'm telling you again, so it sticks." "You can't fight this with a badge," Sophie said. "I keep thinking that, and I keep being afraid to say it, because I don't want to take away the one thing that's kept you steady through every impossible thing we've seen the last 2 months. But an angel, Kate. However corrupted, however wrong she's gotten it, she's not a man in a storage unit. You can't arrest what she is." "No," Kate agreed quietly, "but I can stand between her and the people she's coming for. That's the job, Sophie. It was always the job. The shape of the monster changes. What I do about it doesn't." She pressed a kiss to the crown of Sophie's head, slow and certain. "And this time, I'm not walking through the door alone and leaving someone waiting on the other side of it. This time, whatever happens, we're both still standing when it's over. I need you to believe that as hard as I do, because I have exactly one plan left in me tonight. And it's this. We survive this together, or the whole idea of together doesn't mean anything. I'm not doing this any other way." Sophie turned in her arms, found her mouth in the dark, kissed her slow and unhurried, despite the hour, despite the exhaustion, despite the enormous unanswered danger still circling somewhere above the city. "Okay," she said when they broke apart. "Together. Now sleep. Both of us. The door will still be there in the morning." It was the first time either of them had used the word without flinching from it, and something about saying it plainly, together, in the safety of a shared bed at dawn, made it feel, for the first time in 2 months, like a threshold they might actually choose to cross on their own terms, instead of one that kept being thrown open for them, against their will, by something far older than either of them had ever prepared to fight. Chapter 12. Corvin came to them this time, rather than the other way around, appearing on the bench beside Kate in the small park behind the precinct, with the unhurried arrival of a man who had simply always been sitting there, and only now become worth noticing, a paper coffee cup steaming in his hand, though Kate hadn't seen him buy it. "You saved the boy," he said without preamble. "That's good. That's more than most manage, going up against her this early. Most people don't get a warning shot. You got 2. "Her name," Kate said. It wasn't a question. Corvin turned the cup a slow quarter turn, the same habit Sophie had noticed weeks ago, and Kate wondered, distantly, if it was something all of them did, some tell of the inhuman trying to pass for patient. "Ariel," he said finally, and something in the set of his mouth suggested the name cost him something to give up. "You won't find that useful the way you'd find a suspect's name useful. There's no address, no warrant that reaches her. But you asked, and I think you're owed the truth at this point, given what you've both already survived to earn it. Tell me what she is, really. Not the storybook version." "She is, I suppose, technically, though I don't know that the distinction still means anything to her, what your traditions would call a psychopomp, one of the ones whose entire function since before your species learned to bury its dead with flowers instead of just leaving them for the wolves was to be present at the threshold, to meet the dying at the exact moment their soul let go, and to make sure that moment was gentle." Corvin's face, for once, held still. No shifting behind the features, just a long, old sorrow settling over it like dust. She was extraordinarily good at it. For millennia, she was one of the kindest presences a dying person could hope to have beside them. And then, a little over a decade ago, by your reckoning, something in the structure above her, call it the order she answers to, call it whatever theology you're most comfortable with, began preparing for what she believes, with absolute conviction, is a coming reckoning, a sorting, a judgment more total and more permanent than the ordinary accounting every soul already receives at death. An apocalypse, Kate said. A word close enough for our purposes, Corvin allowed. Ariel became convinced, and I want to be careful here, because I don't actually know that she's wrong, which is the most frightening part of this whole business. That many of the souls she used to gently escort at natural death are going to arrive at that reckoning too broken, too corrupted by unresolved grief and rage and despair to survive its judgment intact. She thinks the weight is killing them twice. Once in life, slowly, through the grief nobody helps them carry. And then again, permanently, at the sorting, because the version of them that finally dies of natural causes years from now will be too damaged by everything in between to be received kindly. Sophie, who had arrived midway through and taken the bench's far end without either of them acknowledging the interruption, spoke for the first time. So she's taking them early, while they're still, salvageable? While they're still willing, Corvin said. That's the mechanism. The terror and the peace both at once that you keep finding in your scans, Doctor. Sophie frowned. The compound. Corvin looked at her. The one in all 4 victims, she said, and in Ben Torres. It depresses the nervous system, destabilizes the heart, pushes the body toward collapse, but the concentrations we found shouldn't have killed any of them when they died. No, Corvin said. They shouldn't have. Kate went still beside her. Sophie stared at him. Then what did? Ariel. The word landed more heavily than Sophie expected. Corvin leaned back against the bench, the coffee held loose between his hands. Coal brings them close enough to death for the threshold to become accessible. The compound weakens the body, slows it, frightens it in ways the conscious mind doesn't always understand. Every instinct they possess knows something is terribly wrong. That's your terror response. Cortisol, adrenaline, the body fighting to remain alive. But it hasn't finished dying, Sophie said. Exactly. Corvin's gaze settled on her. That's the part you've been trying to explain with medicine and failing, because medicine isn't missing anything. Their bodies are still capable of continuing. Perhaps for minutes, perhaps longer. The drug has brought them to the road, but it hasn't taken them to the end of it. And Ariel does. Ariel takes the soul before the body reaches its natural stopping point. Sophie felt something cold settle beneath her ribs, not supernatural this time, simply understanding. That's why I can't find a cause of death that fits, she said. I can see what was happening to them. I can see the path their bodies were on. But there's no final event. No lethal arrhythmia I can prove. No respiratory arrest that explains the timing. They just stop. You can find the road to death, Corvin said quietly. You cannot find the final step because she removes them before they take it. Kate's jaw tightened. And the peace? The peace is the soul. Corvin turned the cup a slow quarter turn between his hands. At the very last instant, while the body is terrified and fighting and entirely convinced it is dying, Ariel shows them a door. She offers an end to the fear, an end to the grief waiting beyond it. And in whatever fraction of a second they're given, they choose, genuinely choose, as far as she understands the word, to walk through rather than face however many more years of pain stand between that moment and the death they were actually meant to have. Sophie thought of Renata Ibarra's face, terror fixed in muscle, peace buried somewhere deeper. Except it isn't really a choice, she said. No, Corvin said. Not the kind either of you would recognize as one, but Ariel does. That's the failure at the center of all this. He looked out across the park for a moment before continuing. She believes she's rescuing them. She believes it with the same absolute, unshakable conviction she once brought to easing every ordinary death placed in her care for 10,000 years. That's precisely what makes her dangerous. She isn't cruel. She's certain. Cole, Kate said. He's not being controlled. He believes it too. He believes it because it's true, as far as it goes, Corvin said. He lost his faith the ordinary way, in a hospital room watching someone die badly, and Ariel found him at exactly the moment he was most willing to believe in a mercy he could see with his own eyes, instead of simply take on faith. His mouth tightened slightly. She doesn't lie to the people she recruits or the people she takes. Neither does Cole. He tells them the door exists. Ariel tells them the pain can stop. Every promise is true, viewed from exactly the right angle. That's the terrible elegance of it. Everyone in this is telling the truth as they understand it. He glanced between them. That's usually how the worst things get done. And you, Sophie said, what are you telling us the truth about? You said this threatens a balance you depend on too. That's not mercy talking, whatever else you are. Something that might have been respect crossed Corvin's unstable features. No, he agreed. It isn't. Every soul that leaves early before its natural account is settled is a soul my side never gets its honest chance at. The years of ordinary human failure and repair that might eventually have brought some fair portion of them our way, regardless of how their story ended. Ariel's mercy is bad for our business, detective, and I won't pretend otherwise to make myself sound nobler than I am. He paused. But it's more than that, too, and you'll have to trust me on this part without a ledger to check it against. The humor had gone out of his voice entirely. The wall between the order of things and the chaos underneath it doesn't care whose side benefits from which brick. Enough souls taken early enough, and the wall doesn't hold for anyone, angels included. Kate's expression hardened. So while she thinks she's preventing the reckoning, she may be helping to create one. Corvin nodded. A smaller, uglier version, years ahead of schedule, right here. She thinks she's saving people from what is coming. If she continues, she may tear down the very structure keeping it from arriving sooner. He looked down at the coffee in his hands, then back at them. And she'll do it out of what she genuinely, honestly believes is love. How do we stop her? Kate asked. Corvin was quiet for a long moment, the coffee cup finally emptied and set carefully on the bench between them, an oddly domestic gesture from a being who had just described the structural integrity of the afterlife. You can't fight her, he said finally. Not with anything either of you carries. Not with a gun, not with a warrant, not with anything short of a force. Neither of you have any business wielding, and I have no intention of handing you. But you can do the one thing she's never had to plan around, because it has never once, in 10,000 years, come up. He looked at Sophie directly, something almost gentle in it. She takes the choice from them, a fraction of a second of terror and surrender, and then she offers a door, and she never once waits to see whether, given a real moment, not a fraction of a second under duress, but an actual, unhurried moment, they'd choose it or refuse it. You're a door too, Doctor. A smaller one, but a door all the same, and doors, unlike angels, can be held open on purpose, long enough for someone to actually decide. His eyes found Kate's. And you, detective, have spent your whole career being the person who arrives in time to give someone back a choice they were about to lose. That's not nothing against a being who's forgotten. Choice is even part of the mechanism. It might be everything. Who's next? Kate said. You said this is speeding up. Give us a name. I can't give you what I don't have, Corvin said, standing, the coffee cup vanishing from the bench as though it had never been there at all. But I can tell you where to look. Cole keeps a ledger, a real one, paper, kept the old-fashioned way because Ariel trusts paper more than she trusts anything with a signal that can be traced. It's in the church basement, behind the wall where they keep the donation records. Find it, and you'll find your sixth name before she does. Chapter 13. The church basement at 2 in the morning was a different building than the one Sophie had sat inside so recently. Cheap cookies and folding chairs and the raw, ordinary grief of people trying to survive their own lives. Empty now, dark, smelling of old coffee and older stone, every ordinary object in it made strange by the hour and the danger. They found the ledger exactly where Corvin had said it would be, behind a loose section of drywall in a storage closet that Cole had clearly never expected anyone to search. A leather-bound book, decades old by the look of the binding, though the most recent entries were written in ink barely a week dry. Kate photographed every page while Sophie stood watch by the door, the two of them moving with the practiced, silent coordination of people who had spent time learning each other's rhythms under pressure. The sixth name, when they found it, made both of them go still. Marisol Vega. The girl from the group, Sophie said. The one you interviewed. She said he saved her life 4 months ago. Kate was already dialing dispatch, requesting a welfare check with the flat, controlled urgency of someone holding panic exactly one professional layer beneath the surface, and it was in the middle of that call, phone still pressed to her ear, that she felt the temperature of the room change the way Sophie had described it changing in the morgue 2 months ago. A half-second of wrongness, the air briefly forgetting how to hold heat, gone as fast as it arrived. Sophie felt it too. She turned toward the far corner of the storage closet, where the shadows had gathered a little too thickly for a room with 3 working overhead bulbs, and found herself looking at nothing at all, and also, somehow, at the unmistakable sense of being looked back at. She's here, Sophie whispered. Or she's watching. I don't know which. Marisol Vega, Kate said, low and steady, into the dark corner of the room, dispatch still holding on the line against her ear, gambling on the possibility that whatever was listening could be spoken to directly. Whatever you think you're doing for her, it's not her choice if you don't give her a real one. You know that. Somewhere under whatever you've convinced yourself of, you know that's not what you used to be. The shadow in the corner did not answer, but the temperature in the room dropped further, sharp and sudden, a cold that had nothing to do with the storage closet's poor insulation, and both of them felt it at once. Not menace, exactly. Something closer to attention. Something old and vast and, for just a moment, uncertain of itself, turning to consider 2 mortal women standing in a basement with a stolen ledger and a phone call already in motion, deciding, in a silence that stretched far longer than it should have, whether either of them was worth the trouble of answering. Then the cold receded, all at once, like a held breath finally let go, and the room was only a room again, cheap drywall, bad lighting, the mundane hum of an old boiler somewhere overhead, and Kate's dispatch call connected at last, an officer confirming they were 3 minutes out from Marisol Vega's apartment. We're not going to make it in time if she's already there, Sophie said. Then we go now, Kate said, already moving for the stairs, and we pray we're faster than an angel who's had 10,000 years of practice arriving exactly when she wants to. Chapter 14. Marisol Vega's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up on the east side, close enough to the sanctuary that Kate had covered the distance in under 4 minutes with the lights running and no siren. Some cop's instinct telling her that sound would only announce their arrival to someone who had no need of ears to know they were coming anyway. The uniformed officer who'd responded to the welfare check was standing in the hallway outside apartment 3C, looking pale and uncertain in a way that made Kate's stomach drop before she'd even reached the door. No answer, the officer said. Doors unlocked, though. Neighbor says she saw an older man leave about half an hour ago. Gray hair, dark coat. Then she heard music, then nothing, about 20 minutes ago. I was about to go in when it got... He stopped, visibly searching for a word that wouldn't sound insane in an incident report. Cold, real sudden, like a window blew open. "There's no window in there that opens, ma'am. I checked the floor plan." "Stay out here," Kate told him. "Call it in as an active welfare emergency, keep the hallway clear, and if anyone besides us tries to go through that door, you stop them, whatever it takes." She didn't wait for confirmation. She was already moving, Sophie half a step behind her, both of them crossing the threshold of apartment 3C into a cold that had nothing to do with any weather this city had ever produced. The apartment was small, cluttered with the particular warmth of a life recently rebuilt. Photographs on the wall, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the ordinary evidence of someone who, 4 months ago, had come close to ending her own life and had instead, slowly, chosen to keep living. On the coffee table beside her was an empty glass. Sophie smelled nothing, saw nothing unusual, but the shallow rhythm of Marisol's breathing was horribly familiar. Marisol lay on the floor of her living room, unconscious but breathing, one hand outstretched toward nothing that either of them could see, and standing over her, resolving slowly out of the cold like a held breath, finally releasing into visible form, was Ariel. She did not look like the paintings. Sophie would think, later, that this was somehow the detail that undid her most completely. Not wings, not fire, not any of the safe, distancing mythology humanity had built to keep this kind of encounter at arm's length. Ariel looked, more than anything, like grief itself given a shape. A tall, still figure with a face of terrible, patient kindness. Light moving under her skin the way moonlight moves under water. Eyes that held the specific, unbearable tenderness of someone who has held 10,000 years of dying hands and never once flinched from the weight of it. "You shouldn't be here," Ariel said, and her voice arrived the way the whisper in the morgue had arrived, 2 months and a lifetime ago, not through the air, but directly, gently, into the part of them that did the listening. "Neither of you. This isn't cruelty. I need you to understand that before anything else. I have never once, not in the entirety of my existence, done a cruel thing to a soul in my care." "You're taking her before she's ready," Kate said, stepping fully into the room, weapon drawn, though every part of her recognized, with cold clarity, how little use it would be here. "That's not care. That's theft with better manners. You don't understand what's coming." For the first time, something like urgency entered Ariel's voice, an old grief of her own showing through the composure. "I have watched the accounting change, detective. I have watched the sorting that's coming grow more exacting, more total, than anything it has ever been in the whole of my long service. And I have watched soul after soul arrive at their natural death, so worn down by the specific, ordinary cruelty of grief that they cannot survive what's waiting for them there. Marisol Vega is going to spend the next 60 years slowly rebuilding herself from what she lost. And some years she will manage it. And some years the grief will nearly break her all over again. And by the time she reaches her natural death at 81 years old, exhausted and threadbare from 6 decades of that particular war, I am afraid, I am certain, that what arrives at the reckoning will not be enough of her left standing to be received kindly. I am not taking her life. I am taking her exactly as she is tonight, whole and brave, and only 4 months out from the worst thing that has ever happened to her, before 60 more years of ordinary human erosion can wear that bravery down to nothing. Ariel looked down at the unconscious woman with an expression of such naked tenderness that Sophie felt something in her own resolve waver, just for a moment, at the terrible sincerity of it. "This is mercy, I promise you. This is mercy." "It's not your choice to make," Sophie said, and her voice, when it came, surprised her with how steady it was. "You keep saying you're not being cruel, and maybe by your own accounting you're right. I don't know. I'm not equipped to judge 10,000 years of service against one bad decade. But you're not asking her. You've never asked a single one of them. You show up at the exact moment they're too frightened and too exhausted to refuse anything that promises to make the pain stop, and you call the absence of resistance a choice. and it isn't. I know what a real choice looks like. I stood at a door once, 18 years ago, and something on the other side of it let me decide, in an unhurried, unfrightened moment, whether I was ready. It let me say no. That's the part you've stopped doing, isn't it? Somewhere in 10,000 years of this, you stopped believing anyone would ever choose to stay. Something in Ariel's ancient, patient face flickered. Not anger, Sophie thought, but something closer to old, buried doubt, a wound reopened by a stranger's hand pressing exactly where it had never fully healed. You, Ariel said slowly, turning the full weight of her attention onto Sophie for the first time, and the cold in the room sharpened, focused, a pressure like standing at the edge of something enormous. You're the door he told me about, the small one. I wondered when you'd find your way here. She tilted her head, an old, evaluating gesture. You want me to give her a moment, an actual choice, unhurried, the way you had yours. Yes, Sophie said. And if I do, and she chooses to stay, and 60 years from now the reckoning finds her broken past saving because I honored a choice I already knew was wrong, will you be the one who tells her, when it's too late to undo, that you're the reason I let her make it? Sophie's mouth was dry, her heart going hard and fast against her ribs, and she felt Kate's presence beside her, steady and unmoving, a wall at her back that made the next words possible. Yes, she said again, and meant it, the full, unbearable weight of it. Because it has to be her mistake to make, if it's a mistake at all, and not yours to make for her. That's the whole of it, Ariel. That's the entire difference between mercy and theft, and I think somewhere under 10,000 years of watching people die afraid, you used to know that better than anyone who's ever lived. The room went utterly silent, the ordinary sounds of the apartment building, a television through the wall, a car passing on the street below, arriving as if from a great distance, and for a long, suspended moment, nothing in the apartment moved at all. Not Ariel, not Kate, not the light shifting under the angel's skin, not even the dust in the air. The entire small room held motionless at the edge of a decision far larger than the four walls containing it. Then Marisol Vega's eyes opened. Chapter 15. She did not wake the way a person wakes from unconsciousness. No gasp, no disoriented blinking against the light. Her eyes simply opened, calm and clear and entirely present, and she looked up at Ariel standing over her with an expression of recognition that made Sophie's chest ache, the specific recognition of someone meeting, at last, face to face, a presence that had clearly been near her, unseen, for a very long time. I know you, Marisol said, her voice arriving strange and layered, the ordinary sound of it and something else beneath it, some quieter frequency running alongside the words. You've been at the edge of every bad night since Martha died. I used to think it was just me. Some trick my grief was playing on me at 3 a.m, but it was you. You were the door. I am, Ariel said, and knelt beside her with a gentleness that made the moment feel, despite everything, almost sacred. I've watched you carry this since Martha died, Marisol Vega. I've watched especially closely these last 4 months. I've watched how hard it's been, and I know how much harder it's still going to be for years yet, before the grief loosens its grip even a little. I can take that weight from you tonight. I can take you somewhere the pain of it stops entirely, and take you there whole and brave, exactly as you are right now, before 6 more decades of carrying it can wear you down. I am offering you a door, and I am asking you, honestly, for the first time in longer than I can any longer remember doing this the honest way. Do you want to walk through it? Marisol was quiet for a long moment, and Sophie watched her face with her heart in her throat, watched the pull of the offer visible in her expression. The exhaustion of 4 months of grief, the terrible temptation of a door that promised the pain would simply, finally, stop. Martha would be so angry at me. Marisol said finally, quietly, and something in her voice cracked and then, unexpectedly, steadied. She fought that fight for a long time before she lost it, longer than anyone outside our family ever knew. And in the 2 years since, I've spent every single day trying to figure out how to be even a little bit as brave as she was. And these last 4 months especially, since the night I almost stopped trying. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away from Ariel. I think about the door every single day. I won't lie to you and say I don't. But I think I want to earn the rest of my life the way she earned every day of the end of hers. The hard way. Awake for all of it, even the parts that hurt. I don't want the mercy. I want the 60 years, even the bad ones. For a long moment, nothing in the room moved. Then Ariel bowed her head, slow and deliberate, and when she straightened, something in her ancient face had changed. Not defeated, Sophie thought, watching closely, but something closer to remembering, an old shape of herself surfacing through 10,000 years of accumulated certainty. "Then you shall have them," Ariel said quietly. "All 60, the hard way." She rose, turning toward Kate and Sophie with an expression neither of them had expected. Not the terrible patient kindness from before, but something rawer, something almost grateful, and beneath it, unmistakably, grief of her own, ancient and enormous, and finally, for the first time in longer than she could measure, examined. "I have taken so many doors from so many people," she said, and told myself every single time that I was giving them a gift instead of stealing a choice, because it was easier to believe that than to sit with what I actually was doing. I don't know how long I've been wrong. I don't know how many of them would have chosen what she just chose if I had only once, in 10,000 years, thought to ask. She looked down at Marisol, still on the floor but sitting up now, wrapped in the officer's jacket that Kate had passed through the door a moment ago, alive, whole, awake. "Thank you," Ariel said to all three of them, or perhaps to something further away, something none of them could see. I had forgotten what it felt like to be told no and to find that I could bear it. "What happens now?" Kate asked, weapons still drawn, though she'd long since stopped believing it mattered, the professional part of her mind already reaching for the next necessary question even in the middle of the impossible. "The others, the ones you already took, Renata Ibarra, Marcus Webb, Priya Anand, Daniel Ferris, is there anything that can be undone?" Something moved through Ariel's face that Sophie would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not hope, exactly, because hope implied a certainty about what she was hoping for, and this was rawer than that, more uncertain, more human than anything Sophie had expected from a being who had just described 10,000 years of unbroken service. "I don't know," Ariel said honestly. "I have never once tried to give a door back after it's already closed. I don't know if that's possible, or if I even have the right to attempt it, given everything I've already taken without asking. But I intend to find out. And I intend to stop taking any more, starting tonight, whatever the cost to me of standing still and simply watching people carry their own grief the hard way, the way I should have let them all along." She looked one last time at Sophie, a long, searching look, old and tired, and for the first time, something close to humble. "You were right," she said, "about the difference between mercy and theft. I hope it cost you less than it cost me to learn it." And then, without any visible transition, without any sound or flare of light, she was simply gone, the cold receding from the room all at once, leaving only the ordinary warmth of an apartment building on an ordinary night, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, and a young woman crying quietly into a police officer's borrowed jacket, alive, and choosing once again, with the choice finally entirely her own, to stay. Chapter 16. The official report, when Kate wrote it 3 days later, described a welfare check that had located Marisol Vega unconscious with the same unidentified compound found in the 4 homicide victims in her system, intervention occurring before her condition progressed to the point observed in the earlier victims. It was not a lie, exactly. It was the version of the truth that would survive contact with a captain, a district attorney, and the family members of 4 people who deserved an answer that fit inside the shape of the world they still believed in. Kate had learned, across 9 years of this job, that there was a kind of mercy in a report that let grieving people keep the world they understood, even when the detective writing it no longer entirely lived in that world herself. Sophie's version, unofficial, existed only between the 2 of them, in the quiet hours after the paperwork, in a shared bed where the impossible could still be spoken of plainly. "I keep thinking about her," she said 3 nights after the apartment, lying with her head on Kate's chest, listening to the steady, ordinary miracle of a heartbeat. Ariel, 10,000 years, and one 19-year-old girl finally said no to her, and it broke something open that should have broken open a very long time ago. "You did that," Kate said. "Not the badge, not the case file. You, standing in that apartment, telling an angel she'd forgotten what a choice was." "We did that," Sophie corrected, tilting her head up to find Kate's eyes in the dark. "I don't think I'd have made it through that door without you at my back. I want that on the record, unofficial as it is." It should have felt, in that moment, like the case was closing, the terrible symmetry of an angel humbled, a girl saved, the whisper in the morgue finally explained and, in its way, resolved. It was Sophie's pager that told them otherwise, buzzing against the nightstand at 4 in the morning with a message from the night shift tech that made her sit bolt upright in the dark. "Another body," she said, already reaching for her clothes. "Storage facility on the west side. Kate. The staging's the same. Salt ring, candles, the works. But there's something in the report that doesn't fit anything we've seen before." "What?" "The victim's alive," Sophie said. "Barely. And the responding officer says the man found kneeling over him, still holding a knife, was reciting scripture and crying. And when they cuffed him, he kept saying the same thing over and over. He kept saying, 'She isn't answering me anymore.'" They found Elias Cole exactly where the responding officers had left him, cuffed to a bench in an interview room at the precinct, the fluorescent light stripping away every trace of the warm, patient counselor Sophie had watched hold a grieving widower's hands previously. What was left looked, more than anything, like a man discovering in real time that the ground he'd built his entire second life upon had simply stopped existing beneath his feet. "She stopped answering me 2 nights ago," Cole said, before Kate had finished sitting down across from him, his voice cracking with something that sounded, disturbingly, like genuine grief. 11 years. 11 years I've stood at that threshold beside her, watching her carry them through so gently, and 2 nights ago the door just closed. I thought I'd done something wrong. I thought I'd failed her. So I tried to do it myself, the old way, the way it's done in every book that's ever described a threshold crossing, because I thought if I could just open the door myself, hold it open long enough, she'd come back and finish what I couldn't." He looked up, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had built an entire faith around a mercy that had just, without warning, walked away from him, leaving him alone with only the terrible machinery of the ritual and none of the presence that had ever made it anything but murder. "I almost killed a boy tonight with my own hands, detective, because I couldn't accept that she'd decided to stop. What does that make me, if she's not there anymore to make it mercy?" Kate looked at him for a long moment, a man who had genuinely, entirely believed he was saving people, right up until the exact second the belief collapsed and left him alone with what the act actually was, stripped of every comforting story he'd told himself about it. "It makes you a murderer," Kate said, without cruelty, because cruelty wasn't necessary and wouldn't have been true either. There was something almost gentle in stating a fact this plainly to a man finally ready to hear it. It always did, Mr. Cole. She just let you believe otherwise for 11 years, the same way she let herself believe it. You're going to spend a long time in a room much smaller than this one, and I think, somewhere underneath everything you've convinced yourself of, you already know that's exactly where you belong. He didn't argue. He put his face in his cuffed hands and wept, the specific wrecked weeping of a true believer discovering, all at once, the size of what his faith had cost other people. And Kate left the room without another word, because there was nothing left to interrogate. The confession had happened before she'd even sat down, and the rest was simply grief, arriving 11 years and one salt ring too late to save anyone. Sophie was waiting in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself against the precinct's aggressive air conditioning, watching through the small window as Cole wept alone at the table. He believed it, she said quietly, right up until she left him standing there with a knife in his hand, and no mercy left to justify it. That's the part I don't think I'll ever stop thinking about. He wasn't lying to any of them. He wasn't even lying to himself. I know, Kate said and drew her in, chin resting on the top of her head, the two of them standing together in a fluorescent hallway at 5 a.m, while a man who had believed himself an instrument of mercy discovered, alone, exactly what he'd actually been an instrument of. That's what made him dangerous. That's what made all of it dangerous. Nobody in this whole thing was lying. Not Cole, not Ariel, not even Corvin, probably, about whatever he actually wants out of all this. Everyone was telling the truth as hard as they could, and 4 people are still dead because of it. 5, almost, Sophie said. The boy tonight. What's his name? Andy Ochoa, Kate said, something in her chest loosening at the shape of the sentence, a note of plain relief she hadn't let herself feel yet. 22. He's going to make it. Cole didn't get far enough before the responding officers found them. Sophie looked up at her, hearing the relief underneath the relief. Not just that the boy would live, but that this case, for once, had let someone walk away from it. Your Danny would be glad, she said quietly, certain of it. That this one gets to stay. I think that's the whole of what he'd want, if any part of what he believed about listening to the dead turns out to be true. Kate held on to that for a long moment. The fluorescent hallway, the weeping man behind the glass, the woman in her arms who had learned, across 2 months of impossible horror, to say exactly the right true thing at exactly the moment it was needed most. Let's go home, she said finally. We've got 4 families tomorrow who deserve better answers than the report I wrote them. Let's go be human again for a few hours before we have to be this again. Chapter 17. Corvin found Sophie alone at the morgue a week later, standing over an unrelated case, a heart attack victim who had died ordinarily, on schedule, exactly the way death was supposed to arrive. And she found, to her own surprise, that she was grateful for the mundanity of it. Grateful for a body whose story ended without any impossible whisper attached to it at all. You did something rare, Corvin said, appearing in the doorway with the same unhurried arrival as always. Though something in his bearing had shifted, some old weariness lifted a degree that she hadn't expected to see in a being who claimed to have watched empires rise and fall without much visible investment in the outcome. Ariel hasn't taken a soul early in 9 days. That's the longest gap in her record in over a decade. I wanted you to know that. I don't think either of you fully understands what you actually changed. Can the 4 of them be given anything? Sophie asked, the question that had been sitting in her chest for a week, heavy and unresolved. Renata, Marcus, Priya, Daniel. Their families are burying them with more questions than answers. I keep wondering if there's some version of this where they get something back, even something small. Corvin was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with a seriousness that suggested he was actually weighing what he could promise, rather than simply offering comfort he had no intention of delivering. "I can't undo what's done," he said finally. "That's not a power either side of this holds, not for a door that's already fully closed. But I asked, before I came here, which is not a small thing in my line of work, asking anyone anything, and there's a version of grace that might still be available to them if their families are willing to receive it in the strange shape it would have to arrive in." "What shape?" "A last word," Corvin said. "Not a resurrection, not a haunting, just a moment, brief, the way you had your moment in that morgue 2 months ago, where each of them could say the thing they didn't get the chance to say before Ariel took the choice from them. Ariel offered it once she understood what she'd done. I think it's the only penance she currently knows how to perform." He looked at Sophie with something almost like an apology in his unstable features. "It would have to come through you again. You're still the door they'd recognize. I understand if that's more than you're willing to carry after everything. Nobody would blame you for saying no." Sophie thought about it, really thought about it, standing in the quiet morgue with an ordinary body on the table beside her, weighing the cost of opening herself up one more time to whatever had made her a door in the first place, against the 4 families she'd watched receive incomplete, unofficial, half-true answers about the worst thing that had ever happened to them. "Yes," she said. "Tell her yes. But I want Kate there. I'm not doing this alone, not this, not ever again if I can help it." The first session happened 4 days later, in a private room Sophie arranged through channels she'd rather not examine too closely. The 4 families coming separately across 4 difficult afternoons. Each of them told a careful, edited version of what was about to happen. A specialized form of grief counseling, Sophie called it, aware of how thin the lie was and unwilling to offer them anything less kind than a lie that let them keep functioning afterward. Renata Ibarra's mother had died 8 months before her daughter. It was Renata's father who came, elderly and skeptical, sitting across from Sophie with the particular hard patience of a man who had already decided this was nonsense and was only here because refusing felt worse than indulging it. When Sophie closed her eyes and felt the familiar cold pressure gather at the edge of the room, and when Renata's voice, unmistakably hers, warm and a little wry, nothing like the whisper of terror that had first announced this whole impossible situation, arrived in the quiet of the room and said, through Sophie's borrowed mouth, "Dad, I know you think this is crazy, and I love you for coming anyway, and I need you to stop blaming yourself for the fight we had at Christmas, because I forgave you before I even got home that night." Her father wept in a way Kate suspected he hadn't allowed himself to weep since the funeral, hard and unguarded, and eventually relieved. Marcus Webb's widow came with their 2 children, and what came through was smaller, simpler, the kind of thing that made Kate's own throat go tight standing at the back of the room. "Tell them I saw the game, the day before, and I was so proud of the kids' free throw, and tell them I need them to keep going to practice even on the days they don't feel like it, because that's how you build something that lasts." Priya Anand's husband had died first, 3 years earlier. It was her sister who came, and what Priya said was longer, more urgent. A message about a locked box in a closet neither of them had ever mentioned, containing letters Priya had never found the courage to send while she was alive. And Sophie watched the sister's face transform from grief into something startled and grateful, already planning, visibly, the drive to the storage unit that afternoon. Daniel Ferris's ex-wife came last, and reluctant, and what Daniel said to her, brief, unadorned, entirely without the bitterness their divorce had apparently earned on both sides, was simply, "I'm sorry, and I hope you're happier now, and I mean that, I really do." 4 sentences that undid 4 years of careful, hard-won distance in the space of 30 seconds, leaving his ex-wife sitting in stunned, unresolved silence for a long time after the cold had receded from the room. By the time the fourth session ended, Sophie was exhausted in a way that went past the physical, hollowed out from carrying 4 goodbyes through her own body in a single week. And Kate walked her out to the car in silence, arm around her shoulders, letting the quiet do the work that words couldn't. "Was it worth it?" Kate asked finally, once they were in the car, engine off, neither of them ready yet to drive. "Yes," Sophie said, without hesitation, though her voice was thin with tiredness. "It cost something. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But I watched 4 families get something they were never supposed to get. A door that's usually locked forever, cracked open just once, just enough. And I don't think I'll ever regret being the person who could hold it open for them." She leaned her head against the window, eyes closing. "I keep thinking about the title of Cole's charity, the Sanctuary. He thought he was building a refuge. He built a trap instead because he never once thought to ask the people inside it what they actually needed." She was quiet a moment. "I think what they needed was just this. Somebody willing to hold the door open long enough for them to say the thing they didn't get to say and then close it again, gently, on their own terms, instead of somebody else's." "You did that," Kate said, echoing the words from the apartment and meaning them exactly as much this time. "That's not a small thing, Sophie. That's not a small thing at all." Chapter 18. It was Sophie who suggested the cemetery, 2 weeks after the 4 sessions. On a Sunday morning, neither of them had anywhere else to be. "You've never taken me to see him," she said, over coffee at Kate's apartment, careful in the way she was careful about most things that mattered, offering the idea gently enough that Kate could refuse it without either of them having to name the refusal. "Danny, I don't want to push, but I've been standing at the edge of your grief for 2 months without ever actually meeting the person it belongs to, and I thought, if you wanted, I'd like to." Kate turned her coffee mug in a slow quarter circle, the habit Sophie had long since stopped finding strange, and thought about it for longer than the question probably warranted. "I haven't been in a year," she admitted finally. "Not since the anniversary. I used to go every month, first year, and then it got, I don't know, harder to go and harder to not go, both at the same time. So I mostly just stopped going and let the guilt about not going replace the actual grief. It was easier to manage somehow, a smaller, more familiar kind of bad feeling." "We don't have to." "No," Kate said, surprising herself. "I want to. I think I've been waiting for someone to ask in a way that didn't feel like an obligation. Everyone else asks like they're checking a box. You asked like you actually wanted to know him." "I do," Sophie said simply. "He sounds like he mattered enormously to who you turned out to be. I'd like to stand somewhere that holds that, with you, if you'll let me." They drove out together that afternoon to a cemetery on the quiet edge of the city where Kate hadn't stood in a year, and Kate found Danny's grave with the unthinking certainty of muscle memory. 3rd row from the oak tree, 2nd from the end, a plain granite marker that read Daniel Reyes, 1985 to 2022. He listened, a phrase Kate herself had chosen for the stone, over his sister's objections that it was too plain, because it was, Kate had insisted, the only thing that had ever needed saying about him. She stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, Sophie a respectful half-step behind her, present but not crowding, and when Kate finally did speak, her voice came out rougher than she expected. "I never got to tell him he was right," she said. "About the dead not lying. About listening being the whole job. I spent 4 years thinking maybe he was wrong that last night. That the thing on the other side of that door wasn't worth what it cost him to go through it and listen. And then a dead woman spoke to you in a morgue, and I realized he wasn't wrong at all. He was just early. He believed something that turned out to be entirely true, and it killed him before the rest of the world caught up enough to prove it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, impatient with herself, and felt Sophie's hand find hers without either of them discussing it, steady and warm. I don't know if that makes it better or so much worse I can't hold it. Maybe both, Sophie said quietly. I don't think grief has to pick just one. She looked at the stone, at the plane, certain words carved into it. He listened. That's not a small epitaph, Kate. That's the whole thing you built your life around becoming, after him. I think that's a kind of him still being here, whether the universe intended it that way or not. Kate crouched, brushed a fallen leaf off the top of the marker with a care that had nothing to do with the leaf mattering and everything to do with needing something small and physical to do with her hands. I met someone, Danny, she said quietly, to the stone, feeling foolish and not caring, Sophie's hand still warm in hers above her. Took me 4 years. She's the reason I finally believe you were right about all of it, and I think you'd have liked her. I think you'd have given her a hard time about dating your partner, and I think under the hard time you'd have been glad. I hope you'd have been glad. She stood, wiped her eyes again, more thoroughly this time, and turned to find Sophie watching her with an expression of such open, unguarded tenderness that it nearly undid her all over again. Thank you, Kate said, for asking, for coming, for not making me do this alone, the way I've been doing everything alone since he went through that door without me. You're not alone anymore, Sophie said, and pulled her in, right there among the quiet rows of graves, holding her the way Kate had held her in a kitchen 2 months ago. The roles reversed now, the debt of comfort being paid gently back. Whatever door either of us stands in front of from now on, I'm going through it with you, or I'm standing at your back while you go. But either way, you don't do the hard ones by yourself again. That's not a mercy. In case you're worried, it sounds like one. That's just what I want, for both of us. They stayed a while longer, sitting together on the grass in front of Danny Reyes's grave, with the unhurried ease of people who had, finally, nowhere more urgent to be. And when they left, Kate found that the guilt she'd been carrying for a year, the guilt of not visiting, of letting grief calcify into avoidance, had loosened just slightly, replaced by something that felt, for the first time since the door he'd walked through had closed behind him, like the beginning of peace rather than the absence of it. I want to come back, Kate said in the car, hands steady on the wheel for the first time in longer than she could remember. Regularly, not out of guilt this time. Just because I think he'd like knowing someone still comes to talk to him. Would you come with me? Not every time, just sometimes. Every time you want me to, Sophie said. I meant what I said back there. I'm not interested in you carrying the hard parts of your life alone anymore, Kate. Not this one, not any of the ones still coming, whatever shape they turn out to take. Chapter 19. By October, 6 weeks after the night in Marisol Vega's apartment, Elias Cole had stopped fighting the case entirely. His lawyers had tried. Kate knew that much from the steady procession of motions, meetings, and carefully worded requests that crossed her desk, each one searching for some version of the story that could be made smaller, cleaner, more survivable. Cole himself seemed uninterested in any of them. He entered guilty pleas to 4 counts of murder in a courtroom crowded with the families of people who would never know the whole truth of what had happened to them. The prosecution laid out the case in the language the ordinary world could hold, the common compound found in all 4 victims, the storage units linked to the Elias Cole Foundation, the ledger of names, the pattern of vulnerable grieving people deliberately selected and prepared for death. Ben Torres found alive before the ritual could be completed. Andy Ochoa found with Cole still kneeling over him. It was enough. More than enough. There was no mention of Ariel, no threshold, no soul taken before a body had finished dying. No demon drinking coffee in a diner while explaining the structural integrity of the afterlife. None of that was necessary to prove what Elias Cole had done with his own hands. When the judge asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, Cole stood with the same wrecked, hollowed-out grief Kate had watched settle over him in the interview room and offered no defense. "I believed I was building a door to somewhere kind. I understand now that I only ever built a trap, and I am the only one who deserves to be caught in it." He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms, one for each of the 4 people he had delivered to Ariel and who had not lived to refuse her. And Kate drove home from the courthouse that afternoon, feeling the particular hollow satisfaction of a case fully closed. Not triumphant, not quite peace, but something adjacent to both. The specific relief of watching a door finally, permanently, shut on something that should never have been opened. Marisol Vega sent flowers to the precinct the week after the sentencing, with a card that read only, "Thank you for giving her the choice to ask me. I'm still choosing the hard way. Some days, it's still very hard. I'm still here." Kate kept the card in her desk drawer, next to an old photograph of Danny that had lived there for 4 years. 2 kinds of proof, side by side, that listening was worth what it cost. By November, Kate had stopped keeping most of her clothes at her own apartment, a slow, undiscussed migration that neither of them had formally decided and both of them had clearly wanted, until the morning Sophie found her standing in front of the hall closet with an armful of uniforms, laughing despite herself. "I think we've accidentally moved in together," Sophie said. "I noticed about 3 weeks ago," Kate admitted, "and decided not to mention it in case saying it out loud made you panic and want your closet back." "I don't want my closet back." Sophie came over, took the uniforms out of Kate's arms, and hung them properly instead of shoving them onto the single remaining rod space the way Kate had been doing. "I want you to stop being weird about the drawer I already cleared out for you 2 weeks ago. I want you to actually use it instead of living out of a gym bag on my bedroom floor like we're 22. And this is a fling neither of us can commit to admitting is real." "It's real," Kate said, something warm and a little disbelieving moving through her chest at hearing it stated so plainly. "I just didn't want to assume." "Assume," Sophie said, kissing her, unhurried, the kitchen light gold and ordinary around them, no cold pressure at the edge of the room, no dead voices, no thresholds waiting to be crossed. Just 2 women standing in a kitchen on an ordinary November morning, choosing each other in the small, undramatic way that mattered most. "Assume everything. I've never once been subtle about wanting you, Kate Brennan. You just spent 6 weeks pretending not to notice, out of some misguided sense of professional distance, and I let you, because watching you work up the nerve was its own kind of entertainment." There had been, in the month since, occasional small reminders that the world Sophie had glimpsed through her own particular door hadn't closed entirely. A restless night here and there where she woke certain, for just a moment, of a presence at the foot of the bed that vanished the instant she reached for the lamp. A case, once, an elderly man dead of natural causes in his own bed, where Sophie had felt, briefly, the ghost of a familiar cold at the edge of the room, and had stood very still, waiting, only to feel it recede after a moment, gentle and unintrusive, more like a passing courtesy than a summons. She had mentioned it to Kate that first time, tense with an old fear that the whole nightmare might be starting again, and Kate had held her through it, steady, until the fear passed. "Do you think it's her?" Kate had asked. "Ariel. Checking in?" "I don't know," Sophie had admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever fully know what I am now, or what I was before any of this started, or whether the door in me closes again someday, or just becomes part of how I move through the world from here on. I used to find not knowing unbearable. I built an entire career on the opposite of not knowing." She'd looked at Kate then, in the dark, with something that was almost peace, I think I've decided I can live with it, though, as long as I'm not the only one standing at the door when it opens. You're not, Kate had said, and meant it completely, the way she'd meant it every time she'd said some version of that sentence since the night on Sophie's kitchen floor, 4 months and a whole reordered universe ago. You're never going to be the only one again. I promise you that as many times as you need to hear it. Corvin appeared one more time that autumn, in the park behind the precinct, coffee in hand as always, though his manner had shifted into something almost like fondness, an odd, weary warmth that suited him better than the careful neutrality he'd worn in their first meeting. Ariel's been quiet, he told them, without preamble, settling onto the bench like a man visiting old friends. Quieter than quiet, actually. She's requested a review of her own service, voluntarily, which, as far as I understand the paperwork involved, has never once happened before in the whole history of the arrangement. I don't know what comes of it. I don't know if beings like her get second chances the way your kind sometimes manages to offer each other, but she asked, which is more than she'd done in 10,000 years before you two stood in that apartment and told her no on someone else's behalf. And you, Sophie asked, did any of this cost you what you thought it would? Less than I feared, more than I expected. Corvin allowed himself something close to a genuine smile, brief and almost human. The wall's a little sturdier than it was before, which suits me better than the alternative, whatever that says about my supposed allegiances. I find I don't mind, particularly, that it cost my side 4 souls we might otherwise have had a fair claim on, decades down the road. There's an argument to be made that fair claims taken honestly, the long way, at 81 instead of 34, are worth more than the ones stolen early out of somebody else's certainty. I didn't used to think that way. I find the two of you have made me consider it. He stood, brushing off a coat that never seemed to gather any actual dust. I don't imagine I'll need to visit again, unless something else breaks that shouldn't. I find, strangely, that I hope I don't. Take care of each other. It suits you both. He was gone before either of them could respond, the particular unhurried vanishing they'd both grown used to, and Kate reached for Sophie's hand on the park bench, watching the autumn light move through the trees, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could easily measure, like the ground beneath her had finally, fully, stopped shifting. Do you think that's really the end of it? Sophie asked. The angels, the demons, the doors. I don't know, Kate said honestly. I don't think either of us gets to know that for certain, not after everything. But I think whatever comes next, we get to meet it together instead of alone, and after the last 4 months, I'm finding that's the only certainty I actually need. Chapter 20. Winter arrived, and with it, mercifully, the specific relief of ordinary casework. A stabbing outside a bar that turned out to be exactly what it looked like, a hit and run with a partial plate that Kate closed in 4 days. The unglamorous, welcome tedium of crime that had nothing to do with thresholds or terror euphoria or whispers arriving from somewhere behind the sternum. Sophie found herself, more than once, quietly grateful for a body on her table that was only, simply, sad. A life ended too early by ordinary human carelessness or ordinary human cruelty. Nothing underneath it but grief. No door standing open at the edges of the room. They spent Thanksgiving at Sophie's sister's house in the suburbs, a slightly chaotic affair involving Sophie's mother, who eyed Kate across the dinner table with the specific evaluating warmth of a woman who had clearly decided, well before dessert, that this one was a keeper, and Sophie's 12-year-old nephew, who spent most of the meal peppering Kate with questions about whether she'd ever shot anyone, which Kate fielded with the patient, careful honesty she brought to every hard question a kid had ever asked her. He likes you, Sophie said afterward, in the car, head resting against the window, sleepy and full in the particular contented way of a good holiday finally ending. That's rare. He's suspicious of everyone. He was suspicious of my last girlfriend for 2 solid years before he decided she was tolerable, and even then, it was a near thing. I like him too, Kate said. He asked good questions. Most adults ask me the boring version of that question. Did it feel bad? Was it hard? Like there's a simple answer they're hoping I'll hand them. He wanted to know what it actually felt like in my hands, which is a much better question, honestly. You're good at this, Sophie said, quiet, watching Kate's profile in the passing streetlights. Being part of a family. I don't think you give yourself enough credit for how good you are at it. I didn't think I'd get another shot at it, Kate admitted. After Danny, I sort of assumed the version of my life that included people. Real, ongoing people, holidays and nephews, and someone's mother deciding I was a keeper over pie. I assumed that version got shelved indefinitely around the same time he did. I built a whole life around being fine with that. It's strange, having it turn out I wasn't actually fine with it. It's stranger, having it turn out I don't have to be anymore. Sophie reached over and laced their fingers together on the gear shift, the old habit that had become, over 4 months, less a gesture and more a kind of home. For what it's worth, she said. I'd shelved a similar version of my own life. I told myself the door thing made me too strange for anyone to really want long-term. That eventually anyone I let close enough would decide I was more trouble than the wanting was worth. And I built an entire life around getting ahead of that rejection, by simply not letting anyone get close enough to deliver it. You didn't just get past that, Kate. You made me actively grateful the door thing happened. Because it's the reason I know, with total certainty, exactly how far you're willing to go for me. Most people don't get proof like that. Most relationships never get tested against an actual angel and come out the other side stronger for it. When you put it that way, Kate said, we did have an unusually thorough first date. Sophie laughed, the real surprised laugh that Kate had come to treasure specifically because it still, 4 months in, felt like something she'd earned rather than something owed to her, and the sound of it followed them, the whole quiet drive home, through streets strung with early holiday lights, past a city that had no idea how close it had come, back in August, to losing 3 more of its grieving and its desperate to a mercy that had finally, at long last, learned to ask first. Late that night, unable to sleep, Kate found herself standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the ordinary dark of the street below, and felt Sophie come up behind her, arms sliding around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. Can't sleep? Thinking, Kate said. About all of it. About how close we came, more than once, to this not working out at all. You disappearing into a storage unit before I got there. Ariel deciding the argument in that apartment wasn't worth hearing. Cole's knife finding its mark before backup arrived. There were about 6 different nights this fall where the whole story ends with one of us not making it home. But it didn't, Sophie said. It didn't end that way. We're standing here. I know, Kate turned in her arms, found Sophie's face in the low light of the street lamp outside, and felt something settle in her chest. Old fear and new certainty arriving together, indistinguishable at the edges. I spent 4 years after Danny convinced that caring about someone that much was just a longer, slower way of losing them. I built my whole life around not finding out if I was right. And then you walked into a crime scene with a headlamp on and started talking to me about gamma waves, and I didn't stand a chance. And somewhere in the last 4 months, I stopped being afraid of finding out if I was right, because I decided I'd rather have this, whatever this costs, whatever it eventually takes from me, than spend 1 more year making sure it never had the chance to. Kate. Sophie's voice had gone soft, something bright and unguarded moving behind her eyes. I'm not saying anything with a ring in it, Kate said, half laughing at herself at the sudden vulnerability of the moment. I'm not that fast, even for me. I'm just saying, I know now. Whatever it costs, I know. Sophie kissed her, slow and certain, in the low light of their bedroom window with the ordinary, undramatic city sleeping below them. No cold pressure at the edge of the room, no threshold waiting to be crossed but the one they were choosing, together, on entirely their own terms. "I know too," she murmured against Kate's mouth. "I've known since a kitchen floor in July. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Chapter 21. The last visitation came in February, on a night when Sophie was working late alone, finishing paperwork on an unrelated case, and felt the room's temperature shift in the old, now familiar way. Not the sharp, focused cold of Ariel's first appearances, but something gentler, warmer almost, like a held breath let out slowly instead of all at once. "I didn't expect to see you again," Sophie said without turning from her desk, some old instinct telling her exactly who had arrived before she'd even looked up. "I didn't expect to come," Ariel said, resolving into the far corner of the office with none of the terrible weight she'd carried in Marisol's apartment 6 months earlier. Smaller, somehow, though Sophie understood, watching her, that the angel hadn't actually changed size at all. Only the sense of vast, unexamined certainty that had once surrounded her like a second skin. My review concluded. "I wanted you to be the one I told, since you're the reason there was anything to review at all." "And?" "I've been given a different service," Ariel said, and there was something in her voice that Sophie hadn't heard from her before. Not quite humility, but something adjacent to it, a willingness to be smaller than she'd been. "Not the threshold anymore. Not for a long while yet. Possibly not ever again, and I find, strangely, that I've made a kind of peace with that. I've been given the grieving instead, the living ones, the ones still standing at the edge of loss without yet being asked to cross it themselves. I sit with them now, in the terrible middle of it, the way I used to only meet them at the very end. It is slower work. It is less certain work. I don't get to offer anyone a door anymore, only company while they walk the long way around the pain, the way Marisol Vega chose to walk it." She looked at Sophie for a long moment, something searching in the ancient patience of her face. "I find I prefer it. I didn't expect that. 10,000 years, and it took one 19-year-old girl and 2 mortal women with more courage than sense to teach me that the slow way might actually be the kinder one." "Is that why you're here?" Sophie asked. "To tell me you're doing better?" "Partly." Ariel's attention shifted, briefly, toward the door, as though sensing something Sophie couldn't yet perceive. "And partly because I wanted to give you something before I step back fully from doors of any kind, and this becomes harder for either of us to arrange. A last kindness, if you'll allow it, from someone who has a great deal of penance still ahead of her." "What kind of kindness?" "The kind you've never once asked me for, because you were too busy fighting me on behalf of everyone else." Ariel's expression softened into something that looked, disconcertingly, like genuine tenderness. 18 years ago, on an icy road, you stood at a threshold I didn't personally attend, and it decided, on its own accounting, not to open for you. You've spent every year since wondering, in the quiet moments you don't admit to anyone, what would have happened if it had. Whether it would have hurt. Whether anyone would have been waiting. Whether the not knowing is the reason you built your whole life around explaining death instead of simply living alongside it. She tilted her head, an old, careful gesture. "I can't answer all of that. I'm not permitted to. And even if I were, I don't know that any answer would actually settle you the way you imagine it would. But I can tell you this much, freely, because it happens to be true and because I owe you a debt no ledger will ever properly record. It would not have hurt. Whatever door eventually opens for you, decades from now, gently, on schedule, exactly the way it's supposed to, it will not hurt, Sophie Quinn. I have stood at that particular threshold 10,000 times, and I promise you, on whatever remains of my authority to promise anything at all, that the very worst part of dying has always, only ever, been the living left behind it. The dying itself, when it's finally, properly earned. That part is closer to relief than anyone standing outside it has ever quite believed. Sophie sat with that for a long moment, feeling something in her chest loosen that she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying, tight and unexamined, for 18 years. "Thank you," she said finally. "Take care of your detective," Ariel said, already beginning to fade back into the ordinary temperature of the room, the ordinary hum of the building's old heating system reasserting itself around her. "And let her take care of you, which I understand, from watching the two of you, is the part you find harder to permit. You've spent your whole life being the door other people lean on. Let this be the year you learn to lean back." She was gone before Sophie could answer, the office settling back into its ordinary, unremarkable quiet, and Sophie sat for a long time afterward with her hands folded on the desk, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel after any of this. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but something quieter and more durable than either. The specific, hard-won piece of a threshold finally, fully closed on her own terms. 18 years, and one impossible autumn later than it should have taken. She drove home that night to find Kate asleep on the couch with a case file open on her chest, the television murmuring some late-night rerun neither of them had actually been watching, and stood in the doorway for a long moment, simply looking at her, steady, familiar, ordinary in the very best way a person could be ordinary. The whole hard-won, thoroughly earned shape of a life Sophie had once genuinely believed she'd never be permitted to have. She woke Kate gently, told her about Ariel's visit in the soft, unhurried voice they'd learned to use for the parts of this story that still, occasionally, needed telling, and Kate listened the way she always listened, completely, without once looking away. "Are you okay?" Kate asked when she'd finished. "I think I finally am," Sophie said, and meant it, fully, for what felt like the first time in 18 years. "I think I just got the one thing I never let myself ask anybody for. I think I'm ready to stop being afraid of the door, Kate. Not because it isn't real, because I finally believe it isn't the thing I should have spent my whole life bracing against." Kate pulled her down onto the couch, into the warm, ordinary weight of her arms, and they stayed there a long while, tangled together in the blue light of a television neither of them was watching, while outside the window the city went on with its ordinary business of living and dying, on schedule, the way it was always supposed to. Epilogue. Spring came late that year, the way it always seemed to in a city that spent its winters pretending it had no intention of ever thawing. And by the time the cherry trees along the cemetery's east path finally committed to blooming, Kate and Sophie had made the drive out to see Danny often enough that the groundskeeper had started greeting them by name. "You're here more than some of the families," he told them once, not unkindly, and Kate had laughed, surprised by how easily the laugh came these days, how little it cost her now compared to a year ago. They stood at the grave a while that particular Sunday, the granite marker warm under the first real sun of the season, and Kate told Danny about the coal appeal that had been denied the week before, about Marisol Vega's graduation invitation that had arrived in the mail, addressed with careful deliberateness to Detective Brennan and Dr. Quinn, both names given equal weight, no explanation required. She told him, too, the way she'd started telling him most things lately, about the ordinary parts of her life that had nothing to do with the case at all. A promotion under consideration, a vacation Sophie had been quietly researching for months. Small, ordinary futures accumulating one unremarkable Sunday at a time. "I think he'd like that you keep talking to him about the boring stuff," Sophie said as they walked back toward the car, her hand finding Kate's the way it always did now, unthinking, automatic, home. Not just the case, not just the grief, the graduation invitations and the promotion, and whether we should go to Portugal or Greece. "I think you're right," Kate said. I think that's actually the whole trick of it. Grief doesn't want the big dramatic gestures nearly as much as it wants to be let back into the ordinary conversation. I spent 4 years keeping him separate from the rest of my life, like visiting him, and living my life were 2 different rooms I couldn't stand in at the same time. Turns out they're just the same room. I don't know why nobody tells you that. They drove home with the windows down for the first time all year, the city loosening around them in the particular optimism of an early spring afternoon. And Sophie found herself, not for the first time, simply watching Kate drive, the sure, easy competence of her hands on the wheel, the small smile she wasn't aware she was wearing, the whole unguarded, ordinary shape of a woman who had, over the course of a single impossible year, learned how to let herself be happy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. "What?" Kate said, catching her looking, glancing over with the particular half-smile that still, 10 months in, made something warm and unhurried unfold in Sophie's chest. "Nothing," Sophie said. "Everything. I'm just having a moment about how ordinary this is. A year ago, I would have given a great deal for a Sunday this boring. I didn't know yet how much I'd end up loving boring." "Boring's underrated," Kate agreed. "Danny used to say the best day on the job was the one where nothing happened. I never fully believed him until now." They stopped for dinner at the same diner 2 blocks from the morgue, the booth that had once hosted a demon's coffee cup, now simply theirs, worn soft with a year of ordinary Tuesday nights and hurried lunches between cases. And it was there, halfway through a shared plate of fries, that Kate went suddenly, uncharacteristically quiet, turning something over in her jacket pocket that Sophie hadn't noticed her carrying until that exact moment. "You've been doing the thing," Sophie said, watching her. "The thing where you go quiet and fidget with something in your pocket like it's a piece of evidence you're trying to decide whether to log. You did it all through dinner at my sister's on Thanksgiving, too. What is it?" Kate huffed a laugh, caught, and set the small velvet box on the table between them, with the particular careful deliberateness of a woman who had rehearsed this moment considerably more than she wanted to admit. "I told you in November I wasn't fast enough for a ring yet," she said. "Turns out it just took me the rest of the year. I bought this in December, and I have been carrying it around for 4 months, trying to find a moment that felt big enough, and every single time I decided the moment wasn't big enough. And today, standing at Danny's grave telling him about Portugal versus Greece like it was the most natural thing in the world, I realized I've had it backwards this whole time. I don't need a big moment. I already have the thing the big moment was supposed to prove. I have a year of ordinary Tuesdays with you, a year of boring, wonderful, entirely survivable Sundays, and I don't want to spend one more of them wondering if I'm brave enough to ask you to keep having them with me." Sophie's hand had come up to her mouth, eyes bright, the diner's ordinary fluorescent light doing nothing to dim the sheer, disbelieving warmth spreading across her face. "Kate." "I'm not asking you to answer right now," Kate said, quick, a little nervous now that the moment had actually arrived, the careful speech she'd apparently rehearsed threatening to outrun itself. I know it's been less than a year since the kitchen floor, and I know most people would say that's fast, and I don't care because I have spent this entire year watching you hold doors open for grieving strangers and stand between me and an actual angel and choose over and over to show up for the hardest parts of both our lives without once asking for anything back. And I would like the chance to spend the rest of however many boring, ordinary, entirely miraculous Tuesdays we get to spend proving I can hold a door open for you just as well. So, Sophie Quinn, will you marry me?" The diner had gone, Sophie realized distantly, very quiet around them. The waitress paused mid-refill by the counter, a couple in the next booth openly staring, the whole ordinary world holding its breath the way it had held its breath once before, in a small apartment on the far side of the city, waiting to see what a person standing at a threshold would choose to do with the choice finally actually being hers to make. "Yes," Sophie said, laughing and crying at once, reaching across the table to pull Kate in before the ring had even properly left its box. Yes, obviously, yes, you enormous idiot. Ask me that question in a diner over cold fries any day of the week, and the answer is always going to be yes. The diner erupted, the waitress whooping, the couple in the next booth applauding, someone at the counter Sophie didn't even know shouting a congratulations into the general noise. And underneath all of it, Kate slid the ring onto her finger with hands that were, for once, not entirely steady, and kissed her, slow and certain and utterly unhurried, in the same booth where a demon had once explained the architecture of the entire universe to her over an untouched cup of coffee, in the same city where an angel had once mistaken theft for mercy and, eventually, learned the difference, in the same ordinary, extraordinary life that had started, impossibly, with a dead woman's whisper in a room gone suddenly cold. "Don't let it take me," Renata Ibarra had said, 5 words that had cracked open an entire hidden architecture of the world and, somewhere in the wreckage of that cracking, had also, improbably, delivered Sophie the one thing she'd spent 18 years quietly believing she'd never be permitted to have. The dead don't pray. Sophie had learned that across a year of whispered goodbyes and thresholds held open on purpose. The dead don't pray, because prayer belonged to the wanting, the waiting, the not yet decided, and the dead, by the time anyone heard from them, had already crossed all the way over into certainty. But the living did. The living prayed constantly, in every small, unspoken form the word could take. In a detective's hand steady on a gear shift, in a pathologist's careful hands over a stranger's body, in a diner booth on an ordinary Tuesday, asking, quietly, desperately, for one more day, one more choice, one more chance to hold a door open long enough for someone to decide, freely, that they wanted to stay. Sophie kissed Kate again, right there in the noise and the applause and the cold fries going colder, and thought with the same steady certainty she brought to every table she'd ever stood over in the morgue, that whatever doors still waited for either of them, however far down the ordinary, unhurried road, she finally, entirely, knew which side of them she wanted to be standing on when they opened. Together, whatever came through, always, from here on, together, the end.